Chapter 823. Gentlemen, how is it? Have you come to a conclusion? Should we wipe out the rat men and guild members who are fighting in the upper city first? Or should we attack the castle occupied by the pirates first? Andre asked with a smile as soon as he arrived in front of them. As a smart person who believed in leaving professional problems to professionals, he threw out the choice when they just arrived at the port. Now that they were about to set off, it was time to ask for an answer. As the leader of the conservative nobles, old George communicated with the knights with his eyes, then raised his head and answered. The result of our discussion is to destroy the castle occupied by the pirates first. The reason is very simple. The ballista set up on the high cliff is too big a threat to us. If we can't eliminate it immediately and let the other party fire with all their strength, we will have a lot of casualties. As for the reckless, motley crew, let them kill each other first. When we have control of the commanding heights, we will turn around and deal with them slowly. Andre nodded thoughtfully. No problem. I respect your opinion. Let's attack the castle first. But now that the upper city has become very chaotic, I'm afraid it won't be easy to pass through quietly. Pass through quietly? No, my friend. You seem to have misunderstood something. You should know that we have a total of 1,600 fully armed soldiers and more than 30 powerful knights. Our enemy, on the other hand, is a group of gang members who have lost the protection of the pirate fleet. They might be good at creating fear and bullying unarmed civilians, but in front of a real army, they're just lambs waiting to be slaughtered. So we don't have to hide at all. If anyone dares to block the path of the army, just crush them. When old George said this, he was full of confidence and aristocratic arrogance. Obviously, he didn't put the Ratmen and the underground guild in his eyes at all. If he wasn't afraid of losing too much and not being able to explain it when he returned, he might have done something like ransacking the entire city. Don't think that all nobles were polite and courteous. Whether it was speaking or doing things, they were full of accent, just like the classic gentleman image in the movies. In fact, most of the time, what they did was no different from pirates, bandits, and so on. Especially in a state of war, it was normal for them to rob and burn the villages, towns, and caravans belonging to the enemy forces. Furthermore, the Sardinian pirates had looted the merchants in the south for hundreds of years, and the wealth they had accumulated was beyond imagination. In the past, no one had been able to bypass the line of defense set up by the pirates. Now that they had successfully landed, there was no way they could return empty-handed. Noticing the greed in the eyes of the nobles and knights, Andre couldn't help but chuckle and spread out his hands nonchalantly. All right, since you all have a perfect plan, I won't say anything more. But as an ally, I think it is my duty to remind you that this city is not as weak as it looks. The enemy hiding in the dark is still a huge threat. Needless to say, just the beast virus carried by the Ratmen is a big problem. It is highly contagious, and even the slightest scratch on the skin will be infected. When the next full moon comes, the infected will turn into a beast and attack all living things that come close. Lastly, you all have to understand that this city is an important part of the whole plan. If it is damaged too much, everyone, including me, will suffer a huge loss. That's all I have to say, and I hope you can consider it carefully. As the last word fell, Andre immediately raised his arm and waved at the dark alley not far ahead. Come out and meet our new allies. In an instant, dozens of figures dashed out from the darkness and appeared in the light. They were all dressed in gray night clothes and had masks on their faces. Their entire bodies exuded a cold and cruel aura. There was no need to ask to know that they were killers and assassins. A woman who looked like the leader took 2 steps forward and knelt on one knee. Honorable sir, I have followed your request and brought all of my most elite subordinates. Very good. You really didn't disappoint me, Teresa. Andre looked into her eyes with a satisfied smile on his face. I never disappoint anyone. Please give the order. Perhaps it was because of the disastrous defeat against the weapon master, Sam, but Teresa suddenly became much calmer. She no longer cared about personal gains and losses. She even put on the night clothes that she had not worn for a long time and personally participated in the most dangerous battle. Her whole person exuded a threatening aura. Andre pointed to the stunned nobles and knights beside him and whispered, "You have two tasks tonight. One is to lead the way, and the other is to help them deal with any resistance they may encounter along the way." Understood. Without any hesitation or nonsense, Teresa nodded and agreed without hesitation. Andre was obviously very satisfied with the change in her attitude. He turned to George and said, "My friend, this lady is one of my trusted subordinates. She can not only point out the right path for you, but also help you deal with the enemies hidden in the dark." She's been lurking around us all this time?" George's voice was obviously trembling, and his face was green and white. There was no need to ask to know that he was frightened. The alley where Teresa was hiding was less than 15 meters away from his position. If it was an enemy, even with the protection of the knights, a surprise attack could kill more than half of the nobles present. "Relax, Count. She is one of us. You don't have to be so nervous. In fact, the mode of war in this city is slightly special. It does not advocate a head-on confrontation. It prefers to achieve its goals through sneak attacks, assassination, intimidation, and bribery. So I solemnly advise you again, no matter what, don't scatter the soldiers and search street by street, because behind every door and window, there could be a deadly dagger dipped in poison hidden." After saying this sentence, Andre gracefully bowed and walked in the direction of President Boris, Countess Anasta, and Chloe. There was no doubt that he had just given the arrogant nobles and knights a show of strength, completely dispelling their thoughts and letting them know who was the master of this archipelago. Chapter 824. Full of disdain for the conservative nobles of Linton City, Andre walked up to President Boris, who was analyzing the energy wall, and asked with a smile, "Master, I'm going back to the Wizard Tower now. I wonder if you're interested in coming along?" "What? You've settled those short-sighted idiots?" Boris asked without turning his head, a sneer full of sarcasm on his face. It was obvious that he had long been fed up with the greed of the nobles, as well as their endless arguments and wrangling. He had also hinted to the association of mages more than once in private to stay away from politics and devote their energy to magic research. "Ha! It seems a little too much for you to say that about Count George Mantell. Although he's a little too scheming, he's still a qualified ally. At least he'll lend a helping hand when a friend needs it. Isn't that right?" Andre didn't have any psychological barriers, casually using a half-joking tone to tease his ally. In his previous life, he'd seen too much deception in the fierce competition in society. Some of them were so vicious that it made one's hair stand on end. Old George's little tricks were nothing. Any businessman living in the 21st century would do worse than him. So-called allies were originally united for common interests. They would also fight for more benefits for themselves when conditions allowed it. If one couldn't even tolerate this, then one's life was destined to fail. Even if one temporarily achieved some results, they would soon be abandoned by their friends and family. Humans were a race that relied heavily on collective strength. They needed to gather a large number of people to continue their civilization and create miracles. And this process of gathering required those in power to learn how to share and compromise. Andre was undoubtedly a qualified leader. He knew when to back down and when not to take a step back. However, President Boris obviously didn't quite agree with this attitude. He pursed his lips, revealing a mocking smile. "Ha ha, ally, don't make me laugh. Even a fool can see that those nobles have taken a fancy to your ability to turn stone into gold, as well as your increasingly powerful spellcasting ability. They want to use this opportunity to tie you to their chariot and establish their family's prosperity for the next few decades. As a senior mage, I have to remind you that it's best not to get too involved with them. Otherwise, when you come to your senses, you'll find that you've already sunk into a quagmire, and you'll no longer be able to maintain a pure heart that yearns for magic. You are very talented. You could even be said to be the most talented young mage I have ever seen, so you don't need to get entangled with those idiots." He put down all his worries and focused all his energy on Arcane research. "I believe that in less than 30 years, you will become the most powerful mage in the entire South. At that time, you only need to give a hint, and those nobles will naturally be like dogs that have smelled meat, crazily wagging their tails to please you. Remember, powerful individual strength is the foundation of standing in this world. All other wealth, power, and beauty are all illusions to deceive the senses. They will make you mistakenly think that you are incomparably powerful, but when the real disaster is about to befall you, you will realize that these things are of no help at all. Hearing the solemn warning of the president, Andre immediately placed one hand on his chest and bowed slightly. Thank you for your reminder. Please rest assured, Master, I will never forget who I am and will never forget where my power comes from. However, you must understand that magic research requires large amounts of resources and wealth, and it also requires the support of worldly power. This is also why most mages prefer to join a certain country or organization. However, I feel that since we mages have such great power and superior intelligence, why don't we try to establish a huge commercial and political organization that is completely dominated by mages? With the current chaotic situation in the South, I believe that with the power of the Linton City Mage Association, it is definitely possible. You see, the conservative nobles have already chosen to form an alliance with me for their own benefits. Once they have tasted the benefits of controlling the transportation channels, they will quickly become my most loyal allies. Similarly, I can also use a similar method to bribe the rulers of other cities and have them willingly join us one by one, creating an endless stream of wealth to provide sufficient funds for magic research. When more than half of the cities in the South are eager to become a member of this organization, we can take all the resources they have, including land, population, minerals, livestock, ships, and so on, and use the most reasonable method to integrate and distribute them and establish a real country, just like the Kingdom of Gorals. Establish a kingdom of mages. President Boris raised his eyebrows in surprise. He obviously didn't expect that the young man in front of him would have such great ambitions and actually wanted to control the entire South. Andre nodded indifferently. That's right. To be exact, it is a parliamentary country led by mages. If the situation permits, it can also be a kingdom or even an empire. The reason why the ancient magic civilization was so glorious was because it ruled half of the Aurare's human population. Just as a famous scholar once said, only intelligent life forms are the carriers of civilization. Without sufficient population, it is impossible to form a real civilization, and even more impossible to surpass the glorious achievements of the ancient mages. President Boris fell into deep thought after hearing Andre's words. After a short few seconds, he raised his head and asked with an unusually serious expression, "Since you already have such an idea, then you must have a corresponding plan. Tell me, how many years do you plan to use to establish this so-called Kingdom of Mages? I will use Sardinia as a base and slowly expand in the form of a trade union with a cycle of 10 years. During this period, I will continuously cultivate mages, and when I have more than 1,000 official mages, I can officially initiate the merger. 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, 50 years, 100 years, and the Flaming Duke, and have a lifespan that humans can't reach. Time has never been a problem for me, and I have enough patience to wait. Of course, this won't be easy. No matter if it's the churches of the gods or the organizations that want to protect their own interests, they won't just stand by and watch me grow. It will inevitably be accompanied by conflict, bloodshed, and even war. But no matter how much they struggle, no matter how much they resist, as long as they can't get rid of their dependence on maritime trade, they will never be able to win." Chapter 825. When Andre said this, he didn't use a loud voice, nor did he show any excitement or fanaticism. He was calm, as if he was describing a fact that was about to happen, and not a huge plan that would take decades or centuries to complete. His naked declaration of ambition made Boris feel shocked and fearful from the bottom of his heart. As a great mage who had lived for hundreds of years, he never thought that the young mage who was humble in front of him a few months ago would become so confident and even have the means and power to stir up the situation. In fact, he didn't know that Andre's performance at this moment was the true self-release. Previously, it was just a disguise to protect himself when he was young, just like the skin of a chameleon. But out of caution, Boris didn't completely believe in this crazy plan. He stared at Andre, trying to figure out what was true and what was false. But it was a pity that Andre's expression didn't change at all, and he didn't make a single sound. The two of them stared at each other for a full 5 minutes. In the end, Boris gave up the intention to continue probing. He sighed slightly and advised with a heavy tone, "All right, it seems like you have a set of ideas that belong to you, and you have the ability to put them into action. But have you considered that such a move to rope in all the conservative nobles in Lincoln City will definitely not be able to hide it from the four dukes? They are the rulers of the city. Once they join in to seize power, what are you going to do? Are you going to fall out with them directly? Or are you already prepared for war and intend to catch them all in one fell swoop and use force to seize the ruling power of the city? You have to know that I plan to completely disappear from everyone's sight after obtaining the method to prolong my life, so I won't be of any help to you. And what you will be facing is not only external pressure from the dukes, but also internal trouble from the association, especially the small circle led by Gavin Lauren, who has always been in close contact with the radical nobles in private. Once I publicly announce that you are the successor of the next president, he will definitely start a rebellion. Now tell me, even in such a bad situation, do you still want to continue with the plan that may cause war?" There was no doubt that President Boris did not wish for unrest in Lincoln City, nor did he wish for the association to split up again. Looking at the old mage's wrinkled face, Andre couldn't help but shake his head and say softly, "Master, I admit that what you said is very reasonable. Based on the current situation, it is indeed very disadvantageous for me. But you don't know that beneath these facades, there's actually a huge conspiracy. It's enough to cause the order of the entire Lincoln City to collapse and cause rivers of blood to flow. Do you still remember the mastermind I mentioned to you before? Now that I know his true identity, I also know the strength he possesses. You might not believe it, but the power he controls is far beyond our imagination. Even if the dukes work together, they might not be a match for him. Do you know? The destruction of Linton's navy had been planned by him, and even the pirates of Bacaro and the Sardinian islands had to listen to his orders. I have to strengthen myself as soon as possible so that I have enough strength for the upcoming battle. Otherwise, the entire Lincoln City will be hopeless. As for Gavin Lauren and his followers, you don't have to worry. Once I'm done here, I'll go back and get rid of him completely, because he's already violated my taboo." As the last word left his mouth, a frightening cold light appeared in Andre's eyes. There was no need to ask to know that he wanted to kill Leyland. How many forces did Loretta Botons control? Andre might not be able to give a definite answer to this question, but what he already knew was enough to scare many people to death. Putting aside the killers, assassins, and intelligence personnel hidden in the shadows, just the army of monsters hidden in the forest was enough to cause uncontrollable panic in the surrounding areas. After all, no matter how weak the goblins and kobolds were, they were still an army of 100,000. What did it mean to have an army of 100,000 in Orire? Based on the population of 100,000 and the hundreds of thousands in the surrounding areas, Lincoln City only had a few thousand city guards. Even if the Navy was included, it wouldn't exceed 20,000. After all, this was already one of the largest cities in the South. Most of the earls in the interior could only deploy 1,000 to 2,000 professional soldiers. Who? Tell me, who is this person? President Boris could clearly tell that Andre wasn't joking, and immediately clenched his fists as he demanded, "I'm sorry, Master. I can't tell you his name yet, because we have an agreement between us. Before the battle officially begins, neither of us can reveal the other's identity, and we can't take the initiative to provoke each other. Otherwise, it'll be the signal for war. Also, it's best that you don't use powerful magic to solve the problem. His level as a wizard isn't much lower than yours, and might even be slightly higher. I'm telling you this not because I want you to do anything, but because I want you to understand that Lincoln City no longer needs me to intensify the conflict. It's already on the brink of destruction. What I need to do is to absorb as much nutrients as possible. That's all." Having said that, Andre turned his head and glanced at the soldiers who were ready to go, as well as the knights and nobles who were in charge of commanding them. In his eyes, these were the nutrients that needed to be absorbed. President Boris furrowed his brows. He obviously didn't believe that there was a wizard more powerful than him in Linton City. After a minute, he stroked the short beard on his chin and asked with a serious expression, "How do you know that his spell-casting ability is stronger than mine?" It's just a feeling. It's hard to describe with words. However, he's admitted himself that he's a level 15 enchantment wizard. I believe you should know very well how terrifying an enchantment wizard is, right? Andre replied with a smile. A level 15 enchantment wizard? How could there be such a powerful wizard hidden in Linton City? Boris exclaimed in disbelief, attracting many curious gazes. They wanted to know what had happened to make this great wizard lose his composure. Andre sighed non-committally and explained in a low voice, "Master, you have to understand that there are many secrets hidden in this world. Moreover, wizards aren't as weak as they seem on the surface. The legacy of the ancient magic civilization has never been cut off. It's just that it's become more hidden." Chapter 826. The inheritance of the ancient magic civilization has never been lost. Boris's eyes glowed as he sized up Andre. He seemed to have realized something. With his level of intelligence, he naturally wouldn't believe that such words could be said so casually. There must be a huge secret hidden within, especially since Andre's level had risen so quickly, and he could occasionally bring out many long-lost magic and potion formulas, and even methods to extend one's lifespan. Anyone would be suspicious, let alone a great mage who often participated in politics and schemed against the nobles. However, Boris had long trained his patience to a level that ordinary people could not hope to achieve. Therefore, he had never made any probing moves. He selectively turned a blind eye to the good things that made countless members of the association green with envy and go crazy. He even pretended not to hear the hints from several senior members. The reason was simple. On one hand, he didn't want to lose the method to extend one's lifespan for no reason. On the other hand, he didn't have the confidence to deal with the power behind Andre. But now, he had a premonition that it was about time to lay all his cards on the table. He became abnormally serious, and every muscle in his body tensed up subconsciously as if he was preparing for a battle. Andre's reaction was the opposite. He still had a faint smile on his face as he said, "That's right, the inheritance of the ancient magic civilization has never been lost, although I can't prove this to you for the time being. Relax, Master, I'm not your enemy. Not in the past, not now, and not in the future. There's no conflict of interest between us, nor is there any entanglement of interests. We just made a deal, and each of us got what we needed. Of course, the mastermind behind the scenes isn't your enemy either. As long as you give up the power in your hands and leave Linton City, I guarantee that he won't take the initiative to find trouble with you. To a certain extent, the area around Linton City and even the entire Southern Sea is now our battlefield. No matter who gets involved, don't think of remaining neutral. Do you understand what I mean?" "Yes, I think I understand." Boris took a deep breath and nodded thoughtfully. "You two are the heirs of the ancient magic civilization, and this competition is some kind of qualification test or trial. Whoever wins will get more resources, right?" "Yes, although there are some discrepancies in the details, the general direction is completely correct. As you can see, this is a contest that adheres to the ancient traditions of the mages. It is a clash of wits. Be it me or the mastermind behind the scenes, none of us have the right to choose or reject because there's a greater power that restricts our actions." Andre had no intention of denying it and admitted it openly. As the owner of the Arcane Eye, he had every right to call himself the inheritor of the ancient magic civilization. As for Loretta Botons, he was the old Lich's official apprentice. What he learned was the crystallization of the ancient magic civilization's knowledge. Naturally, he had the same right. Andre still couldn't understand the purpose of the old Lich's arrangement. Even an emergency, like the sudden awakening of the mystical I couldn't change his original intentions. However, there was one thing he was very clear about. Before he became a true chess player, it was best to obey the old Lich's arrangements and accept his kindness and protection. Otherwise, he might have to face the terrifying gods directly. With Andre's intelligence, he didn't believe that the gods who had destroyed the ancient magic civilization with their own hands would allow him, the owner of the mystical eye, to stay in the material world and slowly grow stronger. Once his identity was exposed, what awaited him would be a storm of attacks. Most of the time, power was the foundation of everything. The so-called ethics and laws were nothing more than a piece of paper used to clean up one's mess. When needed, it would be used to fool the ordinary people and then thrown aside after it was used. It had always been like this since ancient times. Boris furrowed his brows and glared with his sharp eyes. He lowered his voice and asked, "Why are you telling me this? What is your purpose? Or rather, what do you want from me?" Andre leaned forward slightly and whispered into the old mage's ear, "It's very simple. I hope to receive your help. Not now, but after you have gained a long lifespan." "Help? What kind of help?" Boris continued to probe, without batting an eyelid. He appeared to be very cautious, as if he didn't want to be involved in this dangerous game. Andre had already expected the president's cautious attitude. He smiled and explained, "I won't hide it from you. As far as the current situation is concerned, I'm at a great disadvantage, so I especially need the strength of the Association of Mages. The Association of Mages happens to be under your control. I hope that after you return to Linen City, you can try your best to persuade the senior members to support me, or choose to remain neutral. This way, I can deal with Gavin Larn with ease. I believe you should be very clear about what he has done behind the scenes. I have every reason to start a war of revenge, don't I?" When Boris heard this word, an expression of sudden realization appeared on his face. He then muttered to himself, "Revenge? I see. Zebulun is Gavin Larn's apprentice, and also the son of the Blood Marquis, Kyrgyz. Now that their fleet has attacked you, you have every reason to take them to the council and apply for arbitration. If you're not satisfied with the outcome of the arbitration, you can start a duel or even a private war. This is the perfect excuse to start a war." You're right. This is the perfect excuse to start a war. I plan to use this opportunity to completely resolve the internal conflict in the Association of Mages. I wonder if you're willing to support me?" At this point, there was no need for Andre to continue hiding anything. He directly made his request. As his understanding of arcane magic deepened, he increasingly understood the importance of the Association of Mages. To put it bluntly, as long as he controlled the Wizard Tower in Linton City and dozens of official mages, he would be able to monitor every movement in the city. He wouldn't have to fear the army of 100,000 monsters hidden in the border forest. President Boris's expression was very solemn. He was hesitating. He was hesitating whether he should agree to use violent means to kill Gavin Larn. This was because it was very likely to cause the association to develop from a loose organization of spellcasters to a semi-military organization. In the future, they would no longer abide by traditions and rules. Whoever had the bigger fist would have the right. Obviously, this seriously went against the original intention of the Association of Mages. Therefore, he needed to carefully consider before giving an answer. Chapter 827. Andre stood motionless in the sultry and salty sea breeze of the night, silently watching the troops leave the docks and head for the castle at the highest point of the city under Teresa's lead. He didn't seem to be in a hurry, nor did he urge President Boris, who was deep in thought, because he believed that this wise great mage would make the right choice. Under the illumination of the moonlight, a total of more than 1,600 soldiers, except for a small portion who stayed behind to guard the ships, all left for the upper city. Accompanying them were more than 20 heavy bronze cannons and a large amount of ammunition. More than 50 carriages and ox carts were loaded. At a glance, it was a majestic sight. In terms of direct combat ability, with Valence City's current state, there was no force that could stop them from advancing. Even delaying them for a bit was an extravagant hope. Due to the immense destructive power of the cannons, Even if someone wanted to rely on the terrain and buildings to fight in the streets, they would be blasted to pieces in an instant. The Sardinia Islands that had lost the protection of the pirate fleet were like a coconut that had been stripped of its shell, revealing the delicious coconut juice inside and the tender and smooth coconut meat. After who knew how long, perhaps a few minutes, perhaps half an hour. All in all, it wasn't until the last carriage loaded with gunpowder and cannonballs disappeared at the end of the street that President Boris sighed and said in a helpless tone, "All right, I can help you. But you have to guarantee that the scope of your revenge will be limited to Gavin Lauren and his close associates. You can't use this as an excuse to start a purge. There aren't many official members of the Mage Association to begin with, and every one of them is very precious. I don't want to see a bloodbath before I leave." Of course, no problem, I can swear on it. Andre agreed without hesitation. In truth, he didn't have any prejudice against battle mages. He even hoped that there would be as many people in the Mage Association who were inclined towards fighting. That way, he could use this as a framework to build a true battle mage corps. As the name implied, a mage corps was a combat group built by official mages. They were capable of casting large-scale catastrophic spells or magic rituals. In a war between countries, a mage corps was the strongest deterrent force. Generally speaking, as long as the mage squad did not suffer any serious injuries, it did not matter even if all the ordinary soldiers died. After all, they could recruit a new batch in a few years. As for the mage corps, it was the opposite. Every mage corps would take hundreds or even thousands of years to establish. It would take a lot of time to nurture loyal mages and then gather them together for a long period of time. If more than a third of the mage corps died, it was very likely that the entire mage corps would collapse. There is no doubt that the Linton City Mages Guild already had the beginnings of a mage group. All they needed was a strong president to unite them. Although their numbers were still a little low, with the power of the Wizard Tower and the large number of apprentices who could use magic scrolls and wands, it would be no problem for them to crush these independent city-states in the south. After all, the royal mages of the Canteru Kingdom in the north only had a little over 100 people. However, they had been able to suppress the orcs during their large-scale invasions. Every time they cast spells together, they would cause tens of thousands of casualties. They were far more terrifying than the knights' collective charge. Andre wanted to monopolize the sea transportation in the south, so he needed a strong deterrent force. The Mage Corps happened to be one of the most ideal choices. Furthermore, the Mage Corps could not only be used in war, but could also produce large amounts of magic potions, scrolls, and items. They could also conduct all sorts of research and experiments, slowly expanding the number of apprentices and official mages. It was like killing multiple birds with one stone. Of course, it was not easy to achieve this. The first thing he had to deal with was this great mage who specialized in the transmutation element. Boris was acutely aware of Andre's intentions. He subconsciously frowned and asked, "Tell me, if you take over the Mage Association, what changes do you plan to make? Don't say that I didn't warn you. The few old fellows with the highest level of mages are 100% academics. They will not allow you to change the rules without permission." Master, you worry too much. I have never liked to force others. I prefer to pursue freedom of choice. If I become the chairman of the Mage Association, the first thing I will do is to split up all the official members. Those who like to stay in the tower for research will focus on their research, and those who like to fight will fight full-time. After all, a person's energy is limited. Usually, it is difficult to take care of too many things at the same time. Instead of knowing a little about everything, it is better to reach the pinnacle of one aspect. At that time, the academics will be in charge of the research, and the combat mages will be in charge of the protection. No one will complain or be dissatisfied. I believe that under this model, the Mage Association will develop rapidly, especially since I recently found a mage from the Kingdom of Gorals. He has a lot of unique views on training apprentices. How is it? Are you satisfied with my answer? Without holding anything back, Andre directly revealed his plans for the Mage Association in Linton City. From his point of view, these conditions were generous enough. If there were still people who were not satisfied, then they could not blame him for using extreme measures. Freedom of choice? Sound good. There shouldn't be too many objections. Boris stroked the short beard on his chin and nodded lightly. Seeing that the chairman had accepted his plan, Andre immediately laughed and said, "Master, let's leave this topic for today. After all, there is still a long time before it is implemented. We have enough time to slowly perfect it. Come, I invite you to take a look at the wizard tower below us. There are many things you are interested in there." "Ha ha, you are right. There is no need to rush this matter. Lead the way. I can't wait to see the living vampire and the magic information stolen from the association years ago." After saying that, Boris relaxed the tense muscles all over his body and stretched out his hands that were hidden under his loose robe. To him, as long as Andre did not shake the foundation of the Mage Association in Linton City, everything else was negotiable. After all, he had poured his heart and blood into this spellcasters organization for decades. He already had very deep feelings for it, and did not want it to fall apart after he left. Andre also understood this point, so he very cleverly came up with a compromise that both parties could accept. With this, the biggest obstacle between the two of them would completely disappear. There were only some unimportant details that could be put aside for the time being, and slowly discussed when they returned. Chapter 828. Just as Andre was taking President Boris on a tour of the underground wizard tower, Count George Mantel, the leader of the conservative faction of nobles, was leading a group of fully armed soldiers through the main road of Valen City. He was obviously very interested in this city of pirates, constantly looking to the sides along the way. The lower city district, which was built with abandoned ships, gave off an incomparably strange and wondrous feeling. Even the knowledgeable nobles couldn't help but secretly sigh at the creativity of the pirates. However, this peaceful scene didn't last long and was quickly broken by the occasional arrow shot from the shadows. No one knew if it was the actions of individuals or if it was some reckless gang members who wanted to test the strength of these outsiders. But they hid in the dark alleys and launched sneak attacks. In a short 200 meters, more than 20 unlucky fellows fell to the ground with a plop and let out heart-wrenching screams. Damn it! These despicable scum. Pigs. They have no sense of honor at all. A young knight, who'd blocked 3 arrows in a row, finally couldn't take it anymore and started cursing through gritted teeth. He'd obviously never felt so sullen before. He couldn't confirm the enemy's location, nor could he conduct a large-scale search. A slightly older middle-aged knight next to him sighed helplessly and comforted him. "All right, bear with it for a bit longer. We'll turn around and take care of these annoying rats after we occupy the highest castle. Don't forget, they're not knights, nor are they nobles. They're just a bunch of hoodlums and scoundrels living in the shadows. How could they have any sense of honor? You're still young and haven't participated in a pirate encirclement campaign. You'll know when you do. These fellows will stop at nothing in order to obtain victory. I swear on my honor, I'll make these bastards pay the price." The young knight gripped the hilt of his sword tightly and glared fiercely at the pitch-black alleyway. In the end, he resisted the urge to grab the ambushers and chop them into 8 pieces. After all, while sneak attacks were effective against ordinary soldiers, they posed little threat to knights. Unless they used truly powerful bows and crossbows, the knights could even catch the arrows flying at them. The sneak attack continued for an entire journey. Although the damage caused was limited, it dealt a significant blow to morale. It also made the arrogant nobles feel the strong xenophobic and rebellious spirit of this city. In particular, old George, who'd almost been shot in the left eye, was so scared that he broke out in a cold sweat and completely abandoned his original plan of pillaging. He didn't even dare to imagine what kind of terrifying dangers lay in those narrow alleyways. Although 1,000 soldiers wasn't a small number, it was nothing compared to a city of tens of thousands of people. Moreover, this city was so chaotic, so the nobles decisively chose to ignore the sporadic disturbances. Not long after, they passed through the opening in the energy wall and officially stepped into the corpse-strewn upper city district. After a few hours of fierce fighting, The Ratmen and the Underground Guild had left a large number of corpses in the streets and alleyways. Coupled with the stuffy and hot weather, many of the corpses had already begun to rot. The air was filled with the pungent smell of blood and the stench of corpses. Old George had never seen such a tragic scene. He hurriedly took out a handkerchief that he carried with him and covered his mouth and nose. He resisted the urge to vomit and said to the knight beside him, "It seems that I've underestimated these gang members. They may be a motley crew, but they are definitely the most dangerous motley crew. Their ferocity is far beyond our imagination. Pass down my order. Get everyone into a state of combat readiness." "Understood." The knight patted his chest with a solemn expression and turned to pass down the order to the other knights and nobles in charge of commanding. It should be noted that this was a noble alliance army. According to the most basic characteristic of the feudal system, even the king could not directly mobilize a noble's private army, not to mention that old George was just a camp leader. He had to convey his intentions to every noble first. Then, the noble would pass down the order to the knights and soldiers under him. It may sound cumbersome and troublesome, but this was the cornerstone of the feudal system. No one dared to violate it easily. Otherwise, they would face the hostility and siege of the entire noble class. As the order was passed down, more than 1,000 people quickly dispersed. They formed more than a dozen small square formations with 100 people as a unit. They placed the vehicles in the center and moved forward slowly. Fortunately, the roads in the upper city were relatively spacious. The buildings on both sides of the road were also very sparse. They were either luxurious manors, villas, or beautiful two-story wooden buildings. Otherwise, they would never be spread out. Such a large formation naturally couldn't be hidden from the spies hidden in the dark. In less than 5 minutes, this information was placed in front of the leaders of both sides. The Underground Guild didn't hesitate at all. They immediately recalled all their members and curled up in the stronghold. They carefully observed the movements of this unfamiliar army. As for the Ratmen, who were completely dominated by hatred and bloodthirst, they didn't care about anything at all. They directly attacked the noble allied army. In their opinion, as long as it wasn't their own people, it must be an enemy. If it was an enemy, it must be destroyed. It had to be said that Greater Rat Pierre made a very stupid choice. He directly pushed the remaining Ratmen into the abyss of destruction. Oh my God, are these guys crazy? Old George watched helplessly as groups of Ratmen emerged from all directions and charged straight at the infantry formation. He fell into a daze, as if he could not believe what he was seeing. It wasn't just him. The rest of the nobles, knights, and even soldiers were all shocked by the craziness of the Ratmen. After all, even the knights didn't dare to rashly attack the well-disciplined infantry. However, these Ratmen in ragged clothes and short weapons overcame the fear of death. Even in the face of the dense arrows, they still didn't retreat a single step. Spears. Prepare the spear formation. A knight in charge of commanding shouted loudly at the soldiers beside him with a slightly trembling voice. He woke them up from their shock and quickly formed a dense forest of spears. Swordsmen. Heavy armored swordsmen. Protect the flanks. No matter what, we can't let these beasts break the formation. Archers, fire at will. Pay attention to protect the convoy. After a short silence, the well-trained command system finally began to operate. In just a few minutes, the noble allied army had established a defense system. Countless Ratmen were nailed to death by the arrows on the way forward. Some who rushed closer were skewered into meat skewers by the 5-meter-long spears. Those who were lucky enough to pass through the forest of spears were split into two by the heavy armored swordsmen. Blood and corpses quickly piled up everywhere. It was like purgatory. Chapter 829. Under normal circumstances, an ordinary army in the era of cold weapons would be completely crippled once the casualty rate exceeded 30%. Even the elites would not be able to withstand 50% of the casualty rate without collapsing. Of course, this was under the assumption that there was no supernatural interference, or that their emotions were not in an agitated state. However, the Ratmen who had fallen into madness completely defied common sense. They ignored the deaths of their companions and ignored the screams and wails in their ears. They advanced dauntlessly, wave after wave, without any hesitation. Their eyes had completely lost their humanity, leaving only the purest of wildness and bestiality. From a certain perspective, they could no longer be considered humans, but beastly monsters. They had no trace of rationality, and it was hard to say if they even had the ability to think. With such a continuous, frenzied charge, even the sturdiest formation would inevitably show signs of wavering. Moreover, the Ratman's fur itself was a natural armor. Arrows without enough strength would find it difficult to pierce their skin and injure their internal organs. Their claws and teeth were also terrifying weapons. In just a few minutes, the entire defensive line was on the verge of collapse. Many soldiers were pressed to the ground by the enemies who had pounced on them, their throats bitten out. Andre, who was far away in the central control room of the Wizard Tower, saw this scene and chuckled softly to the chairman beside him. "I think my dear Count Mantell has now realized how wrong he was, hasn't he? Oomph. A bunch of idiots who think they're infallible. They don't understand the terror of war creatures at all. They actually dared to approach the gathering place of the Ratmen without even bringing belladonna. I really don't know if they're extremely daring or if they're just ignorant and fearless." Boris's tone was full of contempt and sarcasm, not hiding his disgust for the nobles of Linton City. As for the belladonna, he mentioned it was actually a perennial herb that contained fatal poison. About 4 or 5 of its fruits were enough to kill an adult. However, it was this dangerous plant that was the only antidote for the disease. As long as a small amount of belladonna was consumed within 24 hours of infection, the virus in the body would be killed and the mutation prevented. Unfortunately, this was a very unpopular knowledge, and very few people knew about it. Andre had already expected the president's attitude. He shrugged nonchalantly. "Master, you can't use the standard of a mage to judge those ordinary people. Moreover, it doesn't matter if my allies are stupid or not. What's important is that I can use this opportunity to show my power and let them know who is the leader. That's enough." Having said that, he turned around and instructed the bald mage who was waiting by the side. "Angus, give our allies some magical aid. They must be in dire need of it now. I personally like fire, so I use fire to calm these crazy mice down. Also, make sure to control the area. Don't let the fire get close to the truck. It's loaded with flammable and explosive items." "As you wish, esteemed Tower Master." Angus placed one hand on his chest and bowed slightly. He immediately raised his hand to signal the other mages to get ready. After a few seconds, they began to loudly chant spells and mobilize the energy of the mage tower. In the blink of an eye, a huge and complicated spell structure was vaguely formed. Boris observed silently for a while and nodded thoughtfully. He commented, "His control is average, but he has rich experience in hosting magic ceremonies. It's rare that he can take care of the level of every participant. It seems that you found an excellent assistant." Andre was quite proud of the fact that he had subdued the bald sorcerer. He added with a smile, "Angus is indeed an excellent sorcerer who specializes in spells. Also, he comes from the Magic Kingdom, Gorals. He is particularly good at managing and training apprentices. I've already entrusted the daily affairs of the entire Sorcerer Tower to him." "Oh, you trust him that much?" Boris raised his eyebrows in surprise. He could not believe that Andre would so easily accept a stranger whom he had only known for a few days as his trusted subordinate. "No, Master, I don't trust him at all. I even sent someone to spy on him secretly." Andre glanced at Angus, who had entered a focused state of spell casting, and spoke his mind in a low voice. Boris subconsciously frowned and asked, "You don't trust him? If you don't trust him, why did you give him so much power?" Andre stretched out 2 fingers and explained, "I did this based on 2 points. First, he swore an oath of loyalty in the name of the Arcane Mage. Second, he has outstanding talent. The fundamental principle I follow when it comes to using people is to look at talent first, and then consider loyalty. Generally speaking, As long as the situation is still under control, I won't interfere easily. Before he could finish his last few words, the magic ceremony hosted by Angus finally came to an end. The surging fire elemental energy gathered in large amounts in the air. It was so thick that one could even feel the heat waves that were rushing towards them. Without any hesitation, he directly channeled this energy to the top of the mage tower and then launched it into the sky. In an instant, dozens of huge orange-red fireballs suddenly appeared in the dark sky. They were like meteors falling at an extremely fast speed. Not long after, they exploded on top of the rat men's heads. Boom, 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 boom. Accompanied by a violent, loud noise, the deadly flames engulfed an area of dozens of meters. All the rat men that were caught in it were either completely charred corpses or blown into a pile of black flesh. It was a horrifying sight. The fur that had protected them just now had now become a curse that killed them. No matter how hard they tried to put out the fire or rolled on the ground for their lives, it was all to no avail. In a situation where there was sufficient oxygen, the thick fur became a kind of combustion accelerant. When the smoke of the explosion dissipated, there were only a few rat men left. Even the survivors were injured. The smell of burnt flesh and the smell of meat that assailed their nostrils was simply nauseating. Old George looked at everything in front of him and did not make a sound for a full 5 minutes. A knight beside him was really impatient and hurriedly whispered to remind him, "Sir, the threat of the rat men has basically disappeared. Do you think we should continue moving forward? Is this the power of magic? It's really terrifying." Old George took a deep breath and muttered to himself in a voice that only he could hear. Then he immediately replied, "Of course. The original plan remains unchanged." Everyone immediately set off for the highest point of the fortress. Tell everyone to be careful. What awaits us next is no longer a motley crew, but equally well-trained and unusually fierce pirates. Although he knew that after a fierce battle, the soldiers were already a little tired, but the fortress at the commanding height had to be captured as soon as possible. Otherwise, once the other party reacted, it would be troublesome. Chapter 830. A battle full of fortuitous encounters came and went quickly. With the timely support of the wizard tower, the crazed rat men were eliminated before they could even display their advantages. Apart from a few lucky ones who managed to escape, the rest were all buried here. The injured were cruelly dealt the finishing blow. In a short dozen minutes of fighting, hundreds of mutilated corpses were created. Large amounts of blood splattered everywhere, dyeing the surrounding buildings and streets black and red. It was slippery and sticky when stepped on, making people feel nauseous. This was war. Cruel war. The most violent, most direct, and most effective way for humans to resolve conflicts. There was neither so-called justice nor evil, nor was there a blood-boiling scene like in the stories of bards. There was only efficient slaughter, completely obliterating the conflicting parties from body to spirit. This way, the victorious party would be able to control everything. After the cruel slaughter, the hidden threat of the rat men in Valen City was completely eradicated. Although there were still many young ones left, they were already under Andre's control and posed no threat at all. Similarly, the allied noble army on the other side of the battle had also suffered significant losses. Over 100 elite soldiers had been brutally dismembered, and over 50 had been affected by the explosion of the fireballs, dying on the spot. Around 200 had been injured. In particular, those who had been scratched and bitten by the rat men had no idea that the terrifying bestial virus had already circulated throughout their bodies through their blood. If they didn't receive timely treatment, they would become one of the rat men permanently after 24 hours. Unfortunately, Old George wasn't in the mood to care about the injured. He was more concerned about whether the battle had alarmed the pirates in the castle. One had to know that there was only a narrow path that could fit 4 people side by side from the upper city to the highest castle. Once it was sealed, it didn't matter how many people there were. The only thing he could hope for was for Teresa and her assassins to quietly take care of the sentry towers along the way before the enemy discovered them. Although old George had many common flaws of the noble class, such as looking down on sneaky thieves, he couldn't care less now. Without any hesitation, he walked in front of Teresa and requested in an unusually serious tone, "Madam, I think it's time for you to play your role. Before the army approaches the intersection, please be sure to clean up all the pirates on guard along the way. If any accident occurs, it may directly lead to the failure of the attack, so you and your men had better be careful." "No problem. It's just a small problem. I'll solve it soon." Teresa smiled and agreed without hesitation. She had always been shrewd, so she had already noticed old George's attitude, but she didn't flare up immediately. This was because she knew how important this operation was. She also knew that if the plan to capture the castle was aborted because of her, then the punishment that could come at any time would definitely be 10 times more terrifying than death. "Since that's the case, I'll leave it to you." Old George bowed slightly in a very gentlemanly manner, meticulously displaying the courtesy unique to aristocrats, which could also be said to be hypocritical. She sneered inwardly. She covered her face with a veil and gestured to her subordinate elite assassins. Then, she quickly disappeared into the darkness using the light and blind spots. Relying on the information collected over the decades, she easily found a place to climb on both sides of the cliff, and then used her self-made tools to quietly approach a patrol team of 6 people. There was no need for communication at all. Each assassin automatically chose their target, covered the victim's mouth almost at the same time, and stabbed a fatal dagger into the back of the other party's head. The pitiful pirates didn't even see who killed them, and they didn't even make the slightest sound. After dealing with the patrol team, Teresa immediately raised her arms and pointed at the 5 sentry towers on the path that they had to pass through. Her eyes revealed a cold and cruel light. At the same time, she stretched out her thumb and gently drew a line across her neck. The elite assassins instantly understood and nodded vigorously. They formed groups of 3 and ran to different sentry towers. After only 10 minutes or so, the torches used for illumination on the 5 sentry towers were all extinguished, which meant that the pirates left behind were all dead. The road to the castle had been opened, and the next stage was a frontal assault. The more than 500 pirates left behind in the castle had no idea that their lives were counting down. The sturdy walls and gates that they were proud of could not withstand the tremendous power of the 24-pounder cannon. "What? You said all the sentry towers have been dealt with? So fast?" When old George received the news, he was completely dumbfounded. Even his voice was unconsciously trembling. There was no doubt that he had a great fear of the woman in front of him who did not look strong, especially her sneaking and assassination ability. Anyone with a sense of crisis would subconsciously have a strong defensive mentality. Teresa was obviously very satisfied with old George's expression at the moment. The corners of her mouth curled up slightly, and she teased in a playful tone, "Of course, my dear aristocrat. Assassination, infiltration, and destruction are our specialties. Whether it's a heavily guarded castle or a heavily guarded manor, they can't stop a real assassin. As long as the master gives the order, even the king will find it difficult to see the sun rise the next day. Now that my mission is complete, it's your turn. Don't let the master down." As the last word fell, she pretended to blink her eyes playfully and immediately led her men into stealth mode again, leaving old George hanging in place. Obviously, this was a naked humiliation and demonstration. If it were some relatively conservative kingdom in the north, it might even lead to a duel and war. The knight waiting at the side was obviously burning with anger. He clenched his fists and suggested in a low voice, "Earl, that damned woman is so rude. Aren't you going to do something about it?" "Do something? Tell me, what are you planning to do?" The cunning George Mantle glanced at his loyal vassal and asked without batting an eyelid, "Teach her a lesson. Let her understand that the dignity and glory of nobles cannot be violated." The knight raised his iron-gloved right hand, showing his determination to defend his honor. Unfortunately, old George did not seem to have such plans. He sighed slightly and said, "Forget it. She's Andre's subordinate. We don't have the qualifications." Chapter 831. In fact, it was not that old George did not want to teach Teresa a lesson, but that he could not and did not dare to. Ever since he saw the huge fireball falling from the sky, he had completely given up the idea of fighting for a leading position in this alliance. Andre's strength had expanded too quickly, far beyond everyone's expectations. He had upgraded from a wolf cub with great potential to a terrifying predator like a lion and a tiger, especially the destructive power of magic. Anyone who had experienced it would inevitably be traumatized, fearing that a similar situation would happen to them one day. Coupled with the assassination ability shown by Teresa and her elite assassins, any clear-headed and calm noble would choose to exercise restraint as much as possible. Otherwise, once a conflict broke out, they would be the unlucky ones. George Mantell had been in the noble circle for decades. He no longer cared about honor or dignity like young people, and even paid the price with his life for it. Moreover, Teresa was not someone who could be taught a lesson. Just finding her in the dark was difficult. The knight was obviously unwilling to give up. He asked indignantly, "Are we just going to let it go? You are the leader of one of the two noble factions in Lincoln City. If other allies see this, how can you convince them in the future?" Leader? Convince them? A faint self-deprecating smile appeared on old George's face, and he laughed. "Ha ha! Well, dear Wilson, don't worry. It won't be long before I'm no longer the leader of the conservative nobles, because a new candidate is already in the pipeline. Can't you see it? Andre intends to push Countess Anastasia to the forefront as a spokesperson, and he has the ability to satisfy everyone's interests. Let a young, strong, ambitious, powerful, capable, and potential leader replace an old, conservative, and slightly weak leader. I think no one will object, right? The so-called noble leader is actually not as glorious as it looks on the surface. Not only do they have to confront the enemy head-on, but they also have to mediate and ease internal disputes and contradictions so that every noble in the alliance can benefit. I have been in this position for 10 years. Although I have gained a lot of benefits, I have also consumed a lot of energy. It's time to retire and rest, and cultivate a qualified successor for the Mantell family. It had to be said that old George was indeed a rare wise man in the aristocratic circle. He had a clear position about the change in his position from the beginning to the end. When he met Andre for the first time at the auction, he defined himself as a powerful partner. At that time, although Andre was already quite famous, his foundation was very weak and could not be compared with the huge forces of the conservative nobles. However, this situation did not last for too long. After the second meeting, things changed. After tasting the rich returns of the salt trade, all the nobles involved went crazy over the terrifying profits. From this moment on, he finally saw Andre as an ally who was on equal footing with him. After all, Lincoln City was a trading city-state based on commerce. As long as one had enough gold coins, they could obtain everything they desired, including fame, social status, luxurious material comforts, young and beautiful women or men. They could also raise a large private army, recruit high-rank professionals, and even hire mages to serve them. This was also why when the conservative nobles learned that Andre needed help, they didn't hesitate and immediately dispatched elite soldiers and knights to support him. There was no other reason, only benefits. In their eyes, Andre was a goose that could lay golden eggs. No matter what, nothing should happen to him. As for the third meeting, old George was surprised to find that Andre was not from the same world as himself. The other party had been promoted to a superior at the level of President Boris and the Four Dukes. He had also quietly gained a group of outstanding subordinates. Old George's response to such a dangerous person had always been to give in, compromise, and try not to have a direct confrontation. After all, there was no hatred between the two of them, nor was there a conflict of interest. Therefore, giving up the leadership position was an inevitable choice. The knight called Wilson looked into his monarch's eyes. After a full minute, he shook his head helplessly. "All right, Count, I respect your choice. However, please remember that you are a count, and the Mantell family is an ancient family with a history of 600 years. Sometimes, You have to stand up and protect their honor. Blindly shrinking back will only make people feel that you are weak and can be bullied. I know, of course I know, but not now, and not in this sensitive period. Old George narrowed his eyes and muttered to himself. Just as the two of them were talking, the allied noble army finally passed through the narrow path slowly and arrived in front of the castle at the top of the cliff. This was a classic medieval-style castle built to withstand fierce attacks. The entire body was piled up with the hardest rocks. Just the outer walls alone had as many as 4 layers. The shortest part was more than 10 meters high. 6 towering arrow towers were distributed around the castle, ensuring that every corner was within the range of long-range weapons. No matter which angle the enemy attacked from, they would be attacked by at least 3 arrow towers. To a certain extent, this was a castle that was basically impossible to conquer. Whether it was catapults or ballistas, it was difficult to cause too much damage to the hard rocks. Not to mention climbing the walls directly. At least 5,000 bodies will be left behind just to occupy the 4 layers of outer walls. Staring at the majestic castle in front of him, Knight Wilson immediately sucked in a breath of cold air. Are you sure we can conquer it? Old George smiled bitterly and nodded. Yes, we have to conquer it. Let's hope that the things on the carriages behind are as powerful as what Andre promised. Otherwise, we can only slowly besiege it and wait for the pirates inside to run out of food and water. Go and pass the order. Let the people on the Eye of Arcane start attacking the city gate. As you wish. Wilson gently thumped his chest and turned to walk towards the convoy. He had to find Bartholomew in the crowd first. Other than this experienced old captain, no one else could understand how to use the cannons, let alone unleash the full power of the cannons. In fact, as a knight who was influenced by traditional education, he was more willing to use the giant catapults to bombard the arrow towers and the city wall, and then use the cover of the arrows to attack the city wall. This was because this was the mode of war that he was familiar with, instead of putting all his trust in those metal lumps made of bronze. Chapter 832. An army of more than 100 men could not be as silent as bandits. Even if they were disciplined and did not make a sound from beginning to end, they were deep in the darkness and did not light any torches. However, with the help of the bright moonlight, a pirate standing guard on the Archer Tower discovered the invaders gathered in front of the fortress and immediately rang the alarm bell without hesitation. Clang, 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 warning, warning. A large number of invaders have appeared in front of the fortress. Warning, warning. Accompanied by a short and harsh sound of metal clashing, his voice quickly spread to every corner of the fortress. Even the dark basement was no exception. In just a few seconds, the pirates who had been stationed here for a long time woke up from their sleep, making a lot of noise and cursing while gnashing their teeth. They quickly put on their clothes and armor and walked up the fortress wall with their weapons. In less than 10 minutes, the entire fortress was brightly lit from top to bottom. Even from a distance, one could see the crowd above. Sharp weapons reflected a few cold glints from time to time. There was no need to ask to know that the pirates had been completely awakened and were ready for battle. Even a few cauldrons filled with oil were filled with firewood, and they began to prepare to defend in an orderly manner. It had to be said that even though this fortress had not experienced a real war since it was built, it still maintained a considerable degree of vigilance, especially the ballistas set up at high places. Just looking at them made the attackers tremble in fear. Just as Bartholomew was busy setting up the ballistas, a young noble of 24 or 25 years old found old George. He did not beat around the bush and directly said, "Your Excellency, don't you think that before the war officially starts, we should show our noble demeanor and send the other party a letter of challenge and give them a chance to put down their weapons and surrender?" Letter of challenge? Surrender? Old George widened his eyes and stared at the other party in disbelief. He almost pointed at his nose and shouted, "Are you an idiot?" However, the young noble did not seem to have any self-awareness and still proudly explained, "That's right. If we don't abide by the ancient war etiquette, we will definitely be mocked by the other nobles. Once we were labeled as barbaric and vulgar. Before he could finish speaking, old George could no longer bear it and interrupted. I'm sorry, Baron Herman, I can't satisfy your request. Because the enemy we're facing is a group of pirates who commit all sorts of crimes, and they're also the arch-enemies of Lincoln City. They won't accept your challenge, nor will they surrender to us. So, I order you to return to your post and wait for orders to attack. No, you can't do that. Our reputation will be ruined. The young man called Baron Herman's face flushed red, obviously a little angry. I don't care about reputation or not. I only know that if you send an emissary, then the emissary's head to use as a tool to humiliate us. Now go back and wait for your orders. If you're dissatisfied, you can complain to your father when you go back. Old George did not give any face to the young man in front of him and scolded him in front of countless soldiers. After all, the war was imminent. He did not want to damage the already low morale because of one or two hot-headed idiots. In the era of cold weapons, morale was the most important factor that determined victory or defeat. An army with high morale could defeat an enemy 10 times their number, while an army with low morale would fall into internal strife even before the enemy launched an attack. Baron Herman's eyes quickly became bloodshot. He glared at old George angrily, feeling that he was treated unfairly. However, he knew that he could not disobey the military order at the moment. So, he turned around and left without saying a word. He was not even willing to say a word of greeting. Just as he left, Knight Wilson returned safely. He asked curiously, Count, what happened? Baron Herman seems to be very unhappy. Did you have an argument? Old George shook his head in disdain. No, I only taught that self-righteous idiot a lesson. He actually wanted to send an emissary to the pirates to hand over a letter of challenge and ask them to lay down their weapons and surrender. What? Is he crazy? A surprised expression appeared on Wilson's face. At the same time, he turned around and glanced at the young noble who disappeared into the crowd. Not to the extent of being crazy. In my opinion, it's just that he's heard too many bard stories and can't think straight. If it's a war with the enemies of the civilized world, I'm naturally willing to abide by the ancient rules of war. But pirates, forget it. They even kill the old and the young. They've long lost their humanity. Oh, right. How are the preparations for those metal lumps? When can we start the attack? As he spoke, old George cast his gaze at the busy figures not far away. The crew on the Eye of Arcane lifted the bronze cannons together with the sports car from the cart and fixed them on the relatively flat ground. Then, they carefully calibrated the height of the cannons. More than 20 heavy cannons were lined up in a row. The black muzzles were aimed at the main entrance of the castle. Dozens of experienced gunners quickly filled the gunpowder and stuffed the heavy projectiles into the cannonballs. Finally, they plugged in the fuse and waited quietly for the order to fire. It had to be said that after countless naval battles, they had grasped the basic application technology of the cannons. Although their proficiency was still a little lacking, their movements were quite professional. It was reassuring to look at. Knight Wilson pointed at the cannons and said with a smile, according to Bartholomew's reply, they'll be ready in half an hour at most. He even promised me that 3 volleys at most would be enough to blow up the first outer gate. Old George was a little surprised by Bartholomew's confidence. The corner of his mouth curled up slightly. He asked in a playful tone, he's so confident in these alchemy weapons. Yes, very confident. He even made a bet with me. If it doesn't blow up after 3 volleys, he'll lose 500 gold coins to me. If it does, I'll lose 500 gold coins to him. After saying that, Knight Wilson's eyes revealed a cunning look that did not match his honest appearance. It was obvious that he did this on purpose. He was testing the power of the cannons so as to give a reference to the monarch he was loyal to. Old George nodded in satisfaction. Very good. Then I'll wait and see what kind of weapon my dear Andre has created that dares to ignore such strong fortifications. Chapter 833. Those who had never seen cannons firing in unison would never be able to imagine how terrifying it was. Accompanied by a deafening boom, the entire earth trembled. The kinetic energy released by the gunpowder propelled the heavy metal ball into the air. Everything that stood in its way would be destroyed mercilessly. Even the sturdy city walls were no exception. Although before the invention of cannons, ballistas and catapults could achieve similar effects, the power of machinery was ultimately limited. Unlike cannons, which could be continuously improved and eventually upgraded to become the god of war. Feeling the sultry sea breeze blowing on his face, Bartholomew had a very strange feeling. He knew that tonight, he would personally rewrite the history of the Orir War. From now on, the sturdy city walls and fortresses would no longer be impenetrable moats. He only needed to set up cannons from afar and fire a few times in unison. Just as he was lost in thought, Lady Anastasia came to his side. She gently stroked the cold body of the cannon and asked softly, "I heard that you made a bet with Knight Wilson." "Haha, that's right. He purposely tried to provoke me and test my confidence in this weapon. I guess it was Count George Mantell's private instruction." Bartholomew replied with a smile, not caring at all. Obviously, he had seen through the other party's intentions from the beginning. However, he did not expose him. Instead, he took the initiative to cooperate. After all, for an ordinary knight, taking out 500 gold coins for a bet was already the limit. If he lost, Wilson would be heartbroken for a while. Staring into the old captain's deep and bright eyes, Lady Anastasia suddenly revealed a sly smile. She lowered her voice and teased, "It seems that you are very confident in these metal lumps. Can you tell me if they can sink the largest warship in an instant like the legends say?" "Of course, my lady. Didn't Miss Chloe describe the scene of naval battles to you many times? I can swear on my reputation that she did not mix in any exaggeration this time. If you are still curious, you can stay here and see for yourself. Just be careful and keep a safe distance. Try to block your ears, or you will be temporarily deafened by the loud roar." With that said, Bartholomew stretched out his arm and motioned for the Countess to take her hand away from the cannon and take a few steps back. He didn't want to accidentally hurt his own people when he fired. But before Anastasia could react, a strange noise suddenly came from the castle in the distance. Then, countless black dots were shot into the air and then became bigger and bigger under the acceleration of gravity. They fell straight in the direction of the Alliance army. Damn it. There were stones shot out by catapults and ballistas. Spread out. One of the knights with the fastest reaction quickly ran back, while shouting a warning at the top of his voice. It should be known that even with the physique of a knight that was far superior to that of an ordinary person, he could not withstand the heavy impact of a huge rock. Once he was hit, he would definitely become a bloody meat patty. In just a few seconds, countless rocks finally fell from the sky and smashed down. A dozen or so unlucky people who didn't have time to run away were directly smashed into the ground with a bang. They didn't even have time to scream. It had to be said that catapults and ballistas were perhaps the most merciful weapons in the era of cold weapons. Because the kinetic energy was too great, the victims often died completely before they could feel much pain, even if their deaths were a little tragic. There is no doubt that the pirates took the initiative to attack while the enemy was still standing. With the advantage of height, their catapults and ballistas had a longer range. Although the hit rate was a little unsatisfactory, it still caused a great blow to the morale. Old George, who was almost hit by a stone, shouted in exasperation, "Bastards! How dare they? Counterattack! Let those metal lumps hit them back hard. Immediately! Counterattack! The Count ordered a counterattack. Let's show these reckless pirates what we're made of." Due to the chaos, the orders could only be transmitted one after another. Within a few minutes, it reached the ears of the old captain. Without any hesitation, he roared at the cannoneers under his command, "Little bastards! Did you hear the order? Fire! I bet 500 gold coins that you can blow up the outer wall in 3 rounds. Remember, if anyone dares to embarrass me, I'll make them wash the toilet for a week. If you can do it, I'll use the 500 gold coins I won to buy you wine. Oh, just wait and see. Ha ha! What are you waiting for? Move. Let the pirates see the power of these treasures." I hope they won't be scared to the point of peeing their pants." The vulgar gunners made nasty jokes as they lit the fuses. Then they all plugged their ears and looked into the distance with excitement. For some reason, the side of human nature that craved destruction was vividly displayed on them. Whenever they saw something being torn to pieces under the ravages of the cannonballs, they would have an indescribable pleasure. The fuses were not long and burned out in the blink of an eye. Then, red sparks spurted out from the tiny holes, making a terrible sound. Boom, 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 boom. A total of more than 20 bronze cannons finally began to show their power. The terrible kinetic energy generated by the burning of the gunpowder was transmitted to the ground from the supporting structure. Everyone standing around could clearly feel the ground shaking, and some could not stand steadily. In particular, the soldiers who saw the cannonballs for the first time were obviously frightened. They lay on the ground with their eyes wide open, trying to follow the trajectory of the cannonballs. But unfortunately, their movements were a little too slow and could not catch up with the cannonballs that exceeded the speed of sound. In just 2 to 3 seconds, the cannonballs flew a distance of 1 kilometer and landed near the outer wall near the city gate, causing terrible casualties in an instant. 2 of the cannonballs landed in the same place, directly destroying the upper half of the supporting structure of a small section of the city wall and causing it to collapse with a crash. As for the pirates, needless to say, more than 30 of them were killed on the spot, and more than 50 were injured by the cannonballs that bounced up. The lightest injury was a broken leg or an arm. It was a heavy loss. A distance of 1 kilometer was not far. Everyone could clearly see the tragic situation near the gate and showed a shocked and incredulous expression. Although the loud roar made her ears ring, Countess Anasta still covered her mouth and exclaimed, "Gods above! This is the alchemy weapon made by Andre himself? It's terrible. It's simply completely indescribable with words." Chapter 834. This was the first time cannons appeared on the battlefield in the era of cold weapons. How much of a deterrent was it to the soldiers? Just look at Earth's history and you'll know. Whether it was the loud sound of burning or the unstoppable impact, they were all nightmares for the enemy. It was not surprising that it caused the morale of the enemy to collapse instantly. It was just like the first time weapons like catapults and ballistas were used in war. It would cause great damage to the minds of ordinary soldiers, and a large number of them would even go completely crazy. Fear came from the unknown, so anything that had never appeared before could cause widespread panic and chaos. Fortunately, the Oleo continent was a world with countless supernatural powers. Be it magic or divine arts, they were not inferior to cannons in the slightest. The nerves of humans were also relatively thick. Otherwise, the pirates in the castle would have already rushed out and surrendered. After a round of firing, Bartholomew immediately ordered his subordinates to pour cold water on the cannons to cool them down. At the same time, they used tools to clean up the gunpowder residue in the barrels and put in new gunpowder and bullets. Then, they calculated and adjusted the design angle. Because the original bronze cannons were not fixed like the later field cannons, they had excellent support structures and perfect mechanical design. Most of the reaction force could be neutralized the moment they fired, so every time they fired, the cannon would move more or less. They had to be recalibrated before they could fire a second time. A person who had been trained by Andre personally raised his right thumb and used his eyes to measure the distance between each cannon. After 5 minutes, the 20-odd cannons were all calibrated. With Bartholomew's order, another round of firing began. Boom, 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 boom. The pirates within the castle, who had fallen into chaos, would never have dreamed that the second wave of attacks would come so quickly and so fiercely. It must be known that their catapults and ballistas were still in the process of being reloaded. It would take at least 10 minutes before they could fire again. To some extent, this was one of the signs that cannons were more advanced than mechanical weapons. It was easier to operate, faster to fire, more accurate to hit, and easier to maintain. After all, when artillery was first invented, whether it was its range, destructive power, or its terrifying weight, it did not have the slightest advantage over catapults and ballistae. However, with the advancement of technology, in less than 200 years, artillery completely replaced mechanical throwing weapons and became a great killing machine that dominated the battlefield. Furthermore, the bronze cannons that Andrei had personally created, although they were ancient smoothbore guns and did not have a bore, their material, shape, and length had all reached the optimal ratio. Coupled with the perfect granular gunpowder, the range and destructive power of these cannons were miles ahead of the mechanical throwing weapons. The high-speed cannonballs caused sonic booms in the air as they whizzed down from the sky. Once again, they densely hit the outer walls and gates of the castle. After a huge explosion and dust cloud, the originally bumpy iron hardwood door collapsed with a loud bang. Even the iron gate outside was torn open by the artillery shell, a hole big enough for 3 people to pass through side by side. Dumbfounded, unbelievable, the pirates were scared silly by the scene before them. They did not dare to believe that the sturdy fortress that they were so proud of had its outer shell pried open in less than half an hour after the start of the battle. Although there were still 3 walls behind, as well as a narrow passage in the fortress, none of the pirates believed that they could still hold on. It must be known that no matter what kind of fortress it was, there was bound to be a gate. Since it was a gate, it was bound to be opened and closed frequently. With the level of technology in this world, the junction between the gate and the wall would definitely not be able to withstand a direct attack from artillery. It would be useless even if they blocked it with rocks. A deep sense of fear silently spread among the pirates. Despair had corroded their minds. Perhaps it would not be long before they showed signs of collapse. On the contrary, when the Allied forces saw the destroyed gate, they unanimously let out deafening cheers. The soldiers who were a little disheartened earlier were now completely unaffected by the falling rocks. They shouted that they wanted to rush in and completely occupy this fortress with hundreds of years of history. They all knew very well that this was the nest of the pirates. There must be an astonishing amount of wealth hidden inside, even if most of it had to be handed over to the nobles. As long as they kept a little in private, they could make a fortune. In Oraire, there was no army that would not loot a large amount of wealth. Even the sacred warriors, who symbolized kindness and order, would naturally take the wealth of the defeated enemy as their own. Seeing the high morale of the soldiers around him, George Mantle's eyes flashed with a bright light. He immediately shouted at the top of his voice, "Soldiers! Knights! The gate that was blocking your way has been torn apart. The wealth that the pirates have accumulated for hundreds of years is right in front of you. What are you waiting for? I order you now to capture this castle as fast as you can. No matter how much treasure you get, you can keep 1/3 of it." "What? Is this true?" A young man wearing chainmail and holding a long spear asked with his eyes wide open. He could not believe that such a good thing would happen to him one day. For a soldier, that meager salary could at most keep them fed and warm. If they wanted to get rich, they would have to rely on looting. However, a good thing like looting was not something that every soldier could encounter. Now that they had the chance to loot rich pirates, no one would be able to remain calm. Not to mention the soldiers. Even the knights had their blood pumping faster in their eyes. Their eyes emitted a frightening light. "Ha ha! Of course it's true. I swear on the honor of the Mantle family. All the wealth in the castle will be divided into 3 portions. 1 portion will go to Mage Andre, 1 portion will go to all the nobles present, and the last portion will go to you. But there is one thing. You must first kill all the pirates inside." Old George did not hesitate at all, as he gave his promise with a big laugh. He was very clear that compared to the value of the castle itself and Valen City's unique geographical location, giving up a portion of the wealth was nothing. As long as Andre's plan could be carried out smoothly, it would not take long for this place to become the largest trading port in the south. Just the taxes alone would make all the participating families rich. Long live! Charge! Kill all the pirates! Having received the promise, the soldiers instantly let out a deafening roar and swarmed towards the fortress. They were afraid that they would be disqualified from sharing the spoils of war if they were even the slightest bit slower. Even the arrows that flew down from the high tower could not make them take a single step back. Chapter 835. Seeing the crazy guys dashing past them one after another, the crew of the Eye of Arcane began to get a little restless. Under the instigation of countless people, Ruzi, the mercenary leader, stepped forward with a wry smile and asked, "Captain Bartholomew, do you think we should follow suit? After all, that's the pirate's lair. There must be a lot of good stuff hidden there." Follow up? No, don't even think about it. The old captain immediately shook his head in denial. Our mission has been completed. The next step is to protect these cannons and ammunition and prevent anyone from taking them. Haven't you noticed? The eyes of those nobles are now like beggars who have been starving for days, staring at a sumptuous meal. I bet that if they don't have enough manpower, they will definitely try to get a sample back for research. That's right. The most important thing now is to protect these powerful weapons. We can't let them fall into the hands of outsiders. Countess Anastasia hurriedly stepped forward and echoed. At this moment, her eyes were shining with a fiery light. She couldn't wait to take all the cannons for herself, no different from the other nobles. After all, when the cannons were fired just now, everyone clearly saw that these weapons were not much weaker than a level 3 arcane spell. They didn't need a mage at all, and could be operated by just a few crude sailors. Once they were popularized, they could definitely overturn the current mode of warfare, especially when equipped on warships. Monopolizing the trade of the entire southern seas would no longer be a simple fantasy. Uriz wasn't an idiot. He understood the importance of these secret cannons, so he shrugged his shoulders without minding. All right, I'll go and appease the crew. They are rich enough now anyway. As a member of the Eye of Mystical, even the lowest level of handyman was now worth a lot of money. Just the profits from robbing were enough for them to lie in bed for the rest of their lives. There was no need for them to take risks at all. As it turned out, nobles were particularly sensitive to things that were closely related to their own interests. As soon as Uriz left, old George came to him with several nobles. He skipped the meaningless greetings and small talk and went straight to the point. Captain Bartholomew, I think we have to talk about these weapons immediately. After all, we can be considered as investors. We helped Andre raise the materials necessary to forge them, right? Investment? If I remember correctly, that's not what you said at the beginning. These materials are in exchange for cooperation. I don't think there's anything to talk about. Countess Anastasia retorted righteously. Although the other party was a close ally, she had no intention of backing down. In the face of huge benefits, even the most courteous nobles would tear off their disguise and reveal their most sinister and vicious side. The old captain stroked his thick beard and warned sternly, "I'm sorry, Count, but I don't have the right to discuss these weapons with you. If you want to get more information or make a deal, please go directly to Mr. Andre. He is the inventor and owner of these weapons. In addition, I have to remind you that it's best not to try to use any underhanded methods. Otherwise, I can't guarantee that Master won't overreact." Overreaction? Could it be that he dared to use violence? We sent reinforcements when you needed it the most. Is this how you treat your friends? If that's the case, then it's too disappointing. A pale-faced man who looked to be in his 40s yelled, trying to attract the attention of the people around him and achieve his goal of forcing them to repay his kindness. That's right. We don't expect to obtain the manufacturing technology of these weapons. We only hope to have the qualifications to buy them. Can't we do that? Another noble stood up and made a request. As more and more nobles joined the ranks of condemnation and coercion, Countess Anastasia and Bartholomew gradually began to feel that they were alone. The words became more and more intense, as if a fight could break out at any time. Eunice licked her seductive red lips and asked Nina, who was standing silently behind her, "Hey, pointy ears, what do you think if I rush in now and kill all these annoying flies?" The elven druid stroked her long silver hair and replied softly, "I advise you not to act rashly, and don't cause trouble for Master unless you want to taste the feeling of living a life worse than death." Hee hee. Half-demon, you'd better listen to her. Many times, violence can't solve all problems, especially when you're not strong enough. The winter wolf Michelle opened her mouth and revealed a mouthful of sharp fangs. It seemed to be mocking and threatening at the same time. As an adult magical creature, she was dangerous and cunning, not at all inferior to the Demonkin warriors. In addition, Nina was by her side, so she didn't take Eunice seriously at all. After all, the relationship between druids and their animal companions was not like that between mages, warlocks, and magical pets, where one side completely dominated the other. Their status was relatively equal. If the animal was unwilling to do something, the druid couldn't force it. Otherwise, they might lose their closest comrades and companions. Looking at the winter wolf's half-smiling face, Eunice snorted coldly and didn't say anything else. She wasn't a fool. She knew that she couldn't deal with a winter wolf that could spit out cold air and a druid who had mastered nature divine arts at the same time. Thus, she could only swallow her anger and wait for an opportunity to take revenge in the future. The atmosphere between the two was a little awkward, and Chloe hurriedly smoothed things over. All right, you don't have to be nervous over such a small matter. According to my experience, they're just arguing verbally at most and won't fight at all. Otherwise, Count George Mantell wouldn't have let the knights lead the soldiers to occupy the castle. In fact, similar disputes often occur between nobles for benefits, but rarely do they fight over it. Just as the girl was trying to explain the complicated relationship between nobles to her two friends. All right, actually this friend should be put in quotation marks. Apart from herself, the other two didn't think so. Dazzling white light suddenly flashed in the air, and two figures walked out of it. One of them was Andre himself, and the other was, needless to say, Chairman Boris. The moment they appeared, the nobles who were still arguing immediately shut up, and a trace of fear and apprehension appeared in their eyes. Andre looked at everyone present playfully, and said with a light smile, "Dear friends and allies, you've really disappointed me. Just a few cannons, and you're already acting so unbearably. How can I trust you in the future? Rely on you?" Chapter 836. Why are you all so quiet? Weren't you all clamoring to have a good talk about the cannons? Now that I'm here, feel free to make your requests. Maybe I'm in a better mood today and agree to them directly? Andre didn't let the nobles off just because they were silent. Instead, he began to use an aggressive tone to mock them. He knew very well that if he wanted to make full use of the power of these conservative nobles, he must first let them know where their bottom line was, what they could reach for, and what they couldn't even think about. Otherwise, they would have to pay a painful price for it. After all, no law or rule could be guaranteed with just a few words. Cold and even cruel means must be used to make everyone understand how serious the consequences of breaking the rules were. In this way, the instinct to avoid danger would always remind people not to break the rules. One must know that greed was one of the natural instincts of human beings. At the same time, it was also the ladder for the progress and development of the entire civilization. It was like a raging fire, constantly devouring everything around it, including rationality. For a very long time, the scholars on Earth believed that the majority of the time, the human race's rationality overwhelmed their instincts. However, after systematic observation and analysis, they found that the reality was the exact opposite. Usually, it was not rationality that had the upper hand, but instinct. It was the desire that was rooted in the genes. Appetite, sexual desire, desire for power, desire for enjoyment, desire for survival, desire for lust, desire for knowledge, desire for fame, desire for collection, desire for destruction. It was these many desires that made humans subconsciously make the wrong choice in their daily lives. After the desire passed, they were surprised to find out why they were so stupid at that time. They were secretly annoyed. However, when the desires surged from the bottom of their hearts again, they would still make the same wrong choice again and again. Perhaps it sounded a little unbelievable, but this was the deep-rooted bad habit of human beings. Only a very small number of strong-willed people could restrain themselves and completely reject the temptation of desire, physically and psychologically. As a transmigrator who understood human nature, Andre never expected these nobles to restrain their greed. He only needed to let them know how high the cost of breaking the rules was. If they were to encounter similar situations in the future, their instincts would tell them what to do. Looking at Andre's slightly immature face that already showed the majesty of a superior, old George felt tremendous pressure. If he could, he really wanted to shut his mouth now and let this matter pass. But unfortunately, as the leader of the conservative nobles, he could not remain silent. He could only explain with a bitter smile, "Calm down, please calm down, my friend. There's no need for you to be so angry. We can all sit down and talk about the conditions. I believe that with the strength of everyone present, we will definitely be able to take out something that you're interested in." Calm down? Don't worry, I'm very calm. Otherwise, I would have already used enchantment spells to invade your brains and turn you all into slaves and puppets. Remember, don't always be greedy. My patience is limited. When the last bit is exhausted, I don't mind using the most direct and effective means to achieve my goal. Do you understand? Andre showed an unprecedentedly tough attitude and unceremoniously issued a warning. It could even be said to be an ultimatum. It was not that there was no other way to deal with the greed of the nobles, but that he simply did not have enough time to slowly ease the conflict. With the pirate King Francis fleet about to return, the entire Sardinia Islands would soon change owners. At that time, the tone of the alliance had not been set yet. Once the news leaked out, this place would become the target of public criticism, not to mention that Loretta was still watching from the side. Although intensifying the conflict was likely to lead to countless problems, it was also a way to solve the problem at the same time. Surprise, astonishment, fear, anger. Hearing the words about using spells to control the brain, the nobles instantly panicked and revealed extremely complicated expressions. At this moment, they suddenly realized that they were facing a mage with powerful supernatural powers, not a simple young man. Old George did not expect that such a simple and crude threat would come from Andre's mouth. He could not believe that the other party would turn hostile so quickly, leaving no room for compromise. In his impression, Andre had always been a smart, rational, and polite young man who would never do anything out of line. That was why he dared to bring people to ask for the right to use the new weapon. But now it seemed that his previous judgment was definitely a huge mistake. The strong, cold, and aggressive Andre in front of him was the real him. With just 2 sentences, the scene instantly quieted down. Even the crew not far away could feel the extremely oppressive atmosphere around them. They cast curious gazes, wanting to know what the high and mighty big shots were talking about. As a member of the nobles, Lady Anastasia obviously did not want to make things too awkward. She quietly reached out and pulled Andre's arm, hinting at him to say something to ease the tension. After all, it was a little too much to threaten to use arcane spells to control the mind. Not to mention the arrogant nobles. Even ordinary people would be enraged if they heard it. Glancing at the fearful eyes of the nobles, Andre secretly nodded in satisfaction and said again, "All right, let's end the issue of greed here. Since you're so interested in the cannon, let's talk. To be honest, I don't mind selling this weapon to my allies, but I'm annoyed by your methods." "What? You're willing to sell it?" Old George, who had already given up on getting the cannon, immediately widened his eyes and exclaimed. Not only him, but the other nobles also showed a strong desire on their faces. Of course. Why not? Andre pretended to be indifferent and shrugged his shoulders. Coming from the era of information explosion, he knew better than anyone what kind of business was the most profitable. There was no other reason other than the military fire. The other was a monopoly. Obviously, selling firearms in Orire was an arms business, but it was also a monopoly business. As long as the formula of black gunpowder was protected, no one would be able to crack it within 100 years. Think about it. If the nobles bought the cannon, would they need to buy the matching gunpowder and shells? Would they need to buy a new type of sailboat to maximize the power of the cannon? Chapter 837. Once Andre controlled the source, which was the black gunpowder, everyone who bought the cannons would inevitably become his most staunch allies and loyal supporters. Otherwise, once the gunpowder was cut off, all the cannons would become scrap metal, and their combat effectiveness would instantly fall to the bottom. In the 21st century on Earth, the only superpower did this. Andre applied what he had learned and skillfully used the bond of interests in an attempt to firmly bind the conservative nobles in Lincoln City to his chariot. The other party had no idea that this was a conspiracy from the beginning. The cannons were just bait, and they were secretly happy that they could obtain a powerful weapon of war. After all, most of the time, human thought and cognition were in a perceptual state. The value of an item was usually not measured by its value, but by how easy it was to obtain it. For example, if it was too easy to obtain, people would often not treasure it too much. On the other hand, if it was something that was obtained through untold hardships, they would treasure it even more, even if the former was a priceless gem and the latter was an ordinary pebble. Now, seeing that all the nobles' appetites were hooked, Andre's eyes flashed with a trace of pride. At the same time, he thought, perhaps this is the limitation of the era. No matter how smart the other party is, they can't see what might happen in the future. Because they have never experienced it, they don't know the feeling of being choked by others. After waiting for a few years, I don't know whether these people will regret the choice they made today or secretly rejoice. Old George didn't realize that he had become the prey that fell into the trap. He secretly exchanged glances with several nobles and immediately said, "Please state your conditions. I promise that as long as it's within an acceptable range, we won't bargain." Hearing the hidden impatience in the other party's tone, Andre gently shook his head and unhurriedly stretched out a finger. "Don't worry, my friend. Before we talk about the conditions, first of all, I have to make one thing clear. That is, the cannons will only be sold to allies. I believe you should understand what allies mean, right? In addition, anyone who tries to crack the mystery of this weapon in private will be regarded as a traitor. I will carry out ruthless and even cruel revenge." Although the gunpowder formula wouldn't be cracked for a long time, he still felt that it was necessary to add a layer of insurance. One had to know that the world did not lack geniuses and coincidences. It would be best if they could cut off all possibilities from the root. Even if they could not, they had to make the people who were secretly researching have some scruples and not dare to invest too much. As a transmigrator, Andre was very clear that the development of natural science and technology could not be separated from two things: the popularization of education and the investment of large amounts of money. Keeping an eye on these 2 points would greatly reduce the possibility of firearms being cracked. "No problem. We can swear to the goddess of aristocracy that we believe in." Old George agreed without hesitation. He wasn't surprised by Andre's additional request. If he had such a powerful weapon, he wouldn't share it with anyone even if he was beaten to death. Moreover, this condition was very reasonable and could not be considered harsh at all. As everyone knew, the goddess of aristocracy, Ophelia, was a neutral god. She mainly preached the divine right granted by heaven. Her holy emblem was a goblet with a golden sun painted on it. Her clergy mainly consisted of aristocrats, orthodox, and human royalty. More than 50% of the aristocrats and leaders were her loyal followers. Generally speaking, if the aristocrats swore in her name, the possibility of betrayal was very low, at least before the death of a generation. After getting the answer he wanted, Andre's face instantly showed a satisfied smile. "In that case, let's get straight to the point. In fact, it's not difficult to obtain the right to buy cannons. You just need to join the trade alliance I mentioned before, abide by the various systems within the alliance, and protect the common interests of everyone. Of course, in order to show my sincerity, I'm even willing to provide the latest ships for the important members of the alliance. I believe that along the way, you have already seen the speed, load capacity, wind, and wave resistance of the Eye of Arcane. You should understand what its existence means. Think about it. Once the entire alliance is equipped with such ships, will there be any forces in the southern seas that can compete with us? coupled with the unparalleled advantage of cannons in naval battles, all port cities will tremble under the deterrence of the Alliance. Now it's time to make a choice. If you have any questions, feel free to ask. I'll try my best to answer them. If not, please give me a definite answer. Remember, once you join, there's no room for withdrawal. I need all of you to invest all of your family's power in the Sardinia Islands and establish a strong regime in a short period of time. As the last word fell, the surroundings instantly became silent. Everyone was frowning, quickly digesting the information revealed in the words, considering the gains and losses. Even Countess Anastasia was no exception. As the saying goes, hit with a stick and give with a carrot. An alliance established by threats and violence alone would never last long. Sufficient benefits must be given to the allies. In Andre's opinion, the Galen ship model, which was an era ahead of the Orier, could completely satisfy the appetite of these aristocrats in front of him. It didn't matter even if it was cracked in the future. In any case, he still had more advanced ship design concepts in his mind. He could even use the power of magic to build an invincible ironclad battleship at sea regardless of the cost. After a short minute, old George, who was the leader, was the first to ask, "I roughly understand what you mean, but please explain what the system of the Alliance is. How will it work? How will the benefits be distributed?" The key is that a large investment in the Sardinia Islands will not be able to hide it from the other forces in Lincoln City. What if the four dukes find out? Faced with old George's series of sharp questions, Andre was already prepared. He calmly replied, "First of all, the system of the Alliance is naturally discussed by every member of the Alliance, and then decided by voting. As long as more than 2/3 of the members agree, it can be officially implemented. Secondly, the system of operation will be unified. All accounts must be checked in Valen City, and the final distribution will be based on the shares held by each family." Shares? What's that? A man in his 40s with an exquisite goatee asked with a face full of confusion. Aurère's business environment was relatively backward, and they strongly advocated monopolies, so there were very few precedents of joint ventures. Many merchant alliances used the guise of the alliance to monopolize the prices of raw materials upstream, or the retail prices downstream. In essence, the merchants still operated their own businesses, and all they had to do was pay a yearly operating fee. Thus, it was normal for the aristocrats not to understand this concept. Chapter 838. In order to let these people, whose heads were filled with nobles' privileges and traditional feudal concepts, understand the benefits of a shareholding system, Andre could only sigh helplessly and patiently explain, share rights, simply put, is the ownership of the alliance. Let's use a simple example. In a traditional feudal kingdom, the king controls the largest territory, while the other nobles control the rest. Whenever there's a major problem or war, the king will convene a noble assembly to decide how to deal with it. Sometimes, the king will suppress the nobles, and sometimes, the nobles will force the king to compromise. Our trade alliance is like a kingdom, where shares are equivalent to territory, and those who hold shares are equivalent to lords. As the founder, it is only natural that I obtain the most shares and have the most say in the entire alliance. However, it will never exceed 50%, which is less than half. The remaining half will be shared by all of you. This means that if I go against the interests of the alliance one day, all of you have the power to unite and oust me from my position. The greatest benefit of this system is that it can gather all resources and channels and maximize their exploitation and utilization. It can continuously generate huge amounts of wealth and, at the same time, increase the ability to resist risks and strike at competitors. How about it? Can you understand this description? Apart from that, every family that holds shares will own a portion of the alliance. It can be divided, valued, transferred, and sold like a commodity, and can also be designated as an heir. In principle, as long as it's not sold to enemies or potential enemies, the alliance will not interfere. Think about it. We have the most advanced weapons, the most advanced ships. It was the most advantageous geographical location, even the best opportunity. The Lincoln City Navy that dominated the South is now history, and the ambitious pirates are about to fall at our feet. Even Bocaro City has suffered heavy losses due to the bitter trade war. There will be a vacuum of power on the sea for a long time, and it's the perfect time to rise. Believe me, as long as we work together for a period of time, I guarantee that all of you will obtain unimaginable wealth, fame, and power. You can even easily destroy a region's economy with a single order. As for the attitude of the four dukes, you don't have to worry at all, because in a few days, the pirate fleet will loot and seal off the port of Lincoln City. They will soon be racked by the terrible economic situation and won't have time to care about anything else. As Andre's seductive voice reverberated in the air, the nobles soon couldn't help but turn their eyes to old George, hoping that the leader would make a decision. After all, as members of the conservative faction, they had been united through marriage for generations and had long since become an inseparable whole. It could be said that they were bound together for good or ill. After pondering for a moment, old George solemnly said under the gaze of countless pairs of eyes, "I basically agree to join this alliance, but I still have some questions about the distribution of shares. How do you determine how much each family should get?" He didn't dare to be careless when it came to matters that involved his personal interests. He had to figure it out. It's very simple. It depends on how much money, resources, and manpower are invested. After we've completely exterminated the pirates, I'll start the construction of this archipelago. At that time, whoever invests the most will get the biggest share, and whoever invests the least will get the least. Everyone will supervise together. Isn't that fair? As he said that, a meaningful smile appeared on Andre's face. He finally revealed his trump card at this moment, revealing the true goal hidden in the bottom of his heart. How could he quickly build the Sardinia Islands into a secret base with immense power? It would take at least a few years, or even decades, if he were to rely on himself. But now, Andre had only thrown out a bait, instantly making the conservative nobles who occupied a third of Lincoln City's power work for him. They would send in a steady stream of funds and talents, and Valence City would have a completely new look in at most half a year, becoming an influential power. Of course, the consequence of doing so would be that Lincoln City would slowly be emptied out and eventually decline, with no possibility of rising again. From a certain point of view, the new alliance was like a small monster, lying on the main artery of Lincoln City, thirsting for fresh blood and slowly strengthening itself. One day, it would grow into a giant beast that would strike fear in the hearts of others. It is indeed very fair. I represent the Mantell family and officially announce that we have joined this alliance. Old George was the first to express his stance after some thought. I'll join as well. Me too. Count me in. Some scholars had said that all creatures that moved in groups had a severe herd mentality. When they were hesitant in the face of unfamiliar things, it was often dependent on the attitude of the leader. Since old George, as the leader of the conservative faction, felt that there was no problem, the remaining nobles finally relaxed and expressed their stances one after another. Very good. I express my most sincere welcome to all of you joining. I now declare that we are the closest of allies. Saying that, Andre placed one hand on his chest and bowed very elegantly. He had never lacked manners when dealing with generous investors. Old George returned the bow expressionlessly. Thank you for your welcome. Since we are already allies, when can you start selling the cannons? Andre smiled slightly and replied, as long as the materials are sufficient, I can sell them at any time. But before you buy these weapons, I think it is necessary to give you a detailed introduction. At this point, he waved at Bartholomew, who had been standing at the side without saying a word. Give me the handgun and ammunition you carry with you. The old captain did not say another word and directly pulled out the handgun hanging from his waist, as well as a leather pouch full of gunpowder and bullets, and handed them over with both hands. Andre cleared the barrel slightly and grabbed a small handful of gunpowder with unusual proficiency, stuffing it into the barrel. Then he used a tool to compress the bullets, aimed at a rock not far away, and pulled the trigger. Bang! With a loud bang, sparks flew everywhere, and large amounts of white smoke filled the air. The rock that had been hit had already shattered into pieces. A very young-looking man hurriedly ran over and found the deformed lead bullet in the shattered rock. He exclaimed loudly, This is a miniaturized cannon. That's not wrong, but I prefer to call it flintlock. In principle, there isn't much difference between the two. With that, Andre handed the handgun and ammunition pouch to old George, indicating that he could try operating it himself. Chapter 839. Most humans were very curious about new things, and even old George, who had always been calm, was no exception. He imitated Andre's actions. First, he cleaned up the gunpowder residue in the barrel. Then he grabbed a small handful of black particles, put it in front of his nose, and sniffed it. He muttered to himself, It's a little pungent. It seems like there's sulfur in it. These black things seem to be charcoal. Another nobleman, who was older, added. It had to be said that these knowledgeable old fellows were not just for show. They instantly guessed 2 of the ingredients in the gunpowder formula and stared at Andre with probing eyes, as if to confirm his reaction. Unfortunately, the smile on Andre's face did not change from beginning to end. He only nodded playfully. You guessed right. There's sulfur, charcoal, and some other things inside. Rest assured, I guarantee that without the correct formula, even if you try for 100 years, you won't be able to crack the mystery of these 2 materials. Oh, you're so confident? If I remember correctly, there are many arcane spells that can analyze the composition of materials, right? Old George was not willing to give up, squinting his eyes as he continued to probe. Ha ha! Yes, there are indeed many arcane spells that can analyze the composition of materials, but they have very high requirements for the spellcaster's level. At most, they can only analyze the type of material, but not the proportion of each material. Think about it. If dozens of materials are mixed together, the person who cracked it would have to repeat thousands of experiments. Not to mention the huge roar that would be caused by each experiment. Just buying a large amount of sulfur would be impossible to hide from anyone. So, before the other party can really research the results, I can find out in advance and then strangle it in the cradle. After saying that, Andre raised his right hand and made a clenching action. Scorching flames instantly spewed out from his palm. He did not hide his determination to maintain the monopoly of gunpowder. If necessary, he could transform into the Flaming Duke at any time and bestow destruction and death on his enemies. As a matter of fact, black gunpowder was not very attractive to the powerful people who stood at the top of the pyramid. Regardless of whether it was a high-level warrior who had tempered his body to the extreme or a spellcaster who had mastered a disaster-level magic ritual, none of them would care about the power of a black gunpowder explosion. The former could even use their skin to resist bullets, and their monstrous strength could forcefully change the trajectory of artillery shells. The latter was even more so. The power of a level 3 fireball was no less than that of a grenade or mortar. The level 5 stone to mud spell could instantly turn the sturdiest castle into a pile of useless sand. This could be seen from the attitude of the legendary Lich. After personally experiencing the power of the enchanted revolver, he had no intention of prying into its secrets. The reason was very simple. In his eyes, this kind of pure physical impact damage was completely unable to threaten a powerhouse of his level, even if magical energy was added to the warhead. The ones who truly pried into the power of the black gunpowder were precisely the nobles and merchants who lacked supernatural powers. Andre did not need to care about them at all. He could just attack them directly. All right, since you can guarantee its uniqueness, I'm relieved. Old George nodded as he stuffed the pellets into the barrel of the revolver. He aimed at a rock and pulled the trigger. Bam! With a loud bang, he only felt a strong recoil from the short gun in his hand. His body leaned back uncontrollably, and he staggered a few steps back. He smiled bitterly inside. What great power! I'm afraid it won't be a problem to pierce through leather armor and chainmail within 10 meters. You've really invented something incredible. Andre calmly spread out his hands and asked, I have a long gun with more power and a longer range. Do you want to try it? No, there's no need. I think I already have a good understanding of these weapons. Now, please name your price. How much does a cannon cost? How much does a spear cost? How much does a handgun cost? Most importantly, how much is a ton of these small black pellets? Can you ensure that they are constantly in stock? Old George returned the shotgun to Bartholomew and directly began to ask the question he was most concerned about. He was not a fool. He could see at a glance that gunpowder was the most important component in these new weapon systems. If there was no way to guarantee the supply of gunpowder, then everything would be impossible. You've asked a sharp question, my dear friend. Indeed, with my current channels, I can't satisfy too much of a supply. After all, as you can see, whether it's making cannons or guns, they all require a lot of copper. Gunpowder requires an endless supply of sulfur, saltpeter, charcoal, white phosphorus, and alcohol. In order to increase the difficulty of cracking the black gunpowder, Andre deliberately added some things he did not want to dry. In any case, white phosphorus and alcohol were things that could burn violently. Even if they were added, no one would notice anything. Moreover, white phosphorus could be used to make powerful incendiary bombs, while alcohol could be used to disinfect, make adhesives, and so on. They would not be wasted at all. As soon as he heard that he could not supply a large amount of gunpowder, old George immediately frowned. But just as he was about to say something, Andre immediately added with a smile, "Dear Count, don't be too impatient. I have a way here that can greatly increase the production. I wonder if you're interested in hearing it." "What proposal?" Old George raised his neck and asked doubtfully. "It's very simple. That is, you will provide the raw materials, and I will be responsible for the processing. The processing fee will be charged according to the amount of production. The processing fee for a cannon is 3,000 gold coins, a long gun is 200 gold coins, and a short gun is 260 gold coins. Don't think it's strange. The craftsmanship of short gun is more complicated than a long gun. As for the gunpowder, let's set it at 30,000 gold coins per ton. What do you think?" Andre calmly offered an absolutely black-hearted price. It should be known that with sufficient materials and the casting skills he had mastered, the price of a cannon was at most less than 100 gold coins, and the long and short guns were less than 5 gold coins. Apart from small amount of labor, there was basically no cost to the gunpowder. What's more, he had obtained a large amount of white phosphorus and alcohol for free. It was simply insane to the extreme. Of course, this price was not casually thought of on a whim. It was strictly calculated from the financial resources of the nobles present. Andre needed to control the number of firearms owned by his allies. It could not be too many nor too few. A ship should be equipped with about 4 to 10 cannons and 40 long guns. In this way, the opponent's skills would gain enough advantage in a naval battle, and it would not really threaten his position. Chapter 840. There is no doubt that Andre's price wasn't cheap at all, especially the cannons that the nobles were most concerned about. 3,000 gold coins for one cannon was no different from robbery. One had to know that this was not the selling price, but the processing fee. In other words, they had to prepare about 2 tons of brass and then pay 3,000 gold coins in order to get a finished cannon. Moreover, 30,000 gold coins per ton of gunpowder was enough to make people vomit blood. After all, a 24-pound bronze cannon needed at least 2 kilograms of gunpowder to fire. 30,000 gold coins could only fire 400 times at most, and they would have to buy more if they used it all up. Even though the conservative nobles have been rooted in Lincoln City for so many years, and their wealth was definitely beyond many people's imagination, they still felt the pinch. Old George couldn't help but swallow his saliva and asked tentatively, "Isn't the price you offered a little too expensive? Those cannons and guns are just molded bronze for recasting. The craftsmanship isn't complicated at all. How about half of it? I think 1,500 gold coins for one cannon is a very reasonable price." Andre had already expected this kind of bargaining. He smiled and shook a finger. "No, my friend. Cannon crafting isn't as simple as you think. Do you think it's enough to melt the bronze and pour it into the mold? On the contrary, that's where the true essence lies. First of all, you have to ensure that the inside of the cannon is of the same thickness, the surface is smooth, and the thickness has to be enough to withstand the huge impact at the moment of firing. Otherwise, the cannon will explode in an instant. Even the cannonballs have to be specially polished to ensure that they fit perfectly into the cannon. Otherwise, if they're too big, they won't fit in. If they're too small, they'll cause the energy to leak out and the range to decrease. I can assure you that if you don't have the complete craftsmanship and just imitate the appearance, the biggest possibility is that you'll blow up your own people. In addition, the use of guns is far greater than you think. Especially long guns, they can definitely pierce through chainmail, scale, and leather armor from 50 to 100 meters away. Even breastplates won't be spared if they get any closer. Think about it. How much does a breastplate cost? A total of 400 gold coins. Those who can wear it have to be at least a warrior of rank 2 or above. Normally, they would need at least 5 to 6 soldiers to have a chance of winning. However, now that there were guns, all you needed was a farmer or slave who had undergone simple training to aim at the enemy and pull the trigger. With a loud bang, the enemy would fall into a pool of blood. How much money and time would it take to train a warrior wearing a breastplate? At least 3 to 5 years of rigorous training. However, it only took a few weeks to train a musketeer. Even if I don't say it, you should be very clear about the price-performance ratio. André had no intention of compromising or giving in. He was not worried at all that the nobles would give up because of the high price. Compared to traditional weapons, the advantages of firearms were too obvious. Although they couldn't completely replace crossbows in terms of shooting range, they were easy to operate and didn't have any rigid requirements on a user's physical fitness. After all, a person's physical strength was limited. Whether it was a bow or a crossbow, they all consumed a lot of physical strength. Even for professionals, continuously shooting about 20 to 40 times was already the limit. However, a firearm only needed to be loaded with ammunition and pulled the trigger. Even if it was repeated hundreds of times, it would not be unbearable for the muscles. In addition, the ability to pierce through armor was also a very important selling point. In Oraire, the real expensive things were never weapons, but armor. It was armor. A normal iron sword was at most a dozen gold coins, but a piece of armor, even the cheapest leather armor, was 50 to 100 gold coins. Normal full-body armor started at least 1,000 gold coins, and, according to the level of craftsmanship, it could be sold for more than 3,000 gold coins. The reason was very simple. Knights and warriors who had extraordinary physical fitness could basically rush into a crowd and activate their unparalleled killing mode. Normal weapons were completely useless against them. Generally speaking, the best way to kill an enemy wearing full-body armor was to use magic. For example, magic weapons, magic arrows, magic potions, or even divine spells or arcane spells. Of course, anything related to magic or divine spells would not be cheap. The most important thing was that the supply was too low. Many times, even if you had money, you might not be able to buy it. Now that there were firearms and cannons, a volley of shots could make the enemy pay a terrible price. Even powerful knights could not guarantee that they could dodge the bullets that were faster than the speed of sound every time. The conservative nobles, led by Old George, were still hesitating. After hearing the words just now, they had no objections to the price. Now, they were worried about whether the firearms really had such a strong armor-piercing ability. In order to give these guys some confidence, André slightly raised the corner of his mouth and said to Bartholomew beside him, "Dear Vice Captain, please take the crew and show the power of firearms to our allies. At the same time, help relieve the pressure on the soldiers who are in a difficult battle. Remember, when you fire, it's best to greet the knights who are commanding the battle and ask them to withdraw the soldiers. I don't want to hear that they have accidentally injured our own people." "Hee. Of course, dear Captain, it will be my pleasure." Bartholomew placed one hand on his chest and bowed respectfully. He glanced at the Alliance army that was fighting on the second wall from the corner of his eye. A cruel smile appeared on his wrinkled face. Without the powerful siege ability of the cannons, the Alliance army's advance could be said to be as slow as a snail. For half a day, they had been in a tug-of-war with the pirates in the narrow passageway. If not for the large number of knights, they might have been beaten back by now. One must know that the reason why the castle was regarded as the foundation of countless nobles was that it was designed for defense from the inside out. The winding and narrow roads were like a maze, limiting the advantage of the attacking side and increasing their attack area. Even if the gate was breached, they could rely on the narrow and complicated terrain inside to drive the enemy out. In particular, the pirates had fixed ballistae with terrifying penetrating power at several excellent shooting points. This caused the knights to be distracted at all times and completely unable to move freely. In just a few minutes, Bartholomew had gathered 100 musketeers, brought a few barrels filled with gunpowder, and headed straight for the castle. As an old captain who was chased by the pirates, he could not wait to use these powerful new toys to take revenge on the enemy and let them have a taste of what it was like to be surrounded by fear. Chapter 841. A scholar once said that war could make the most cowardly person strong, and victory could bring an unprecedented sense of satisfaction. Although most of the sailors on the Eye of Arcane did not want to participate in the cruel naval battle at first, with the huge advantage of firearms, they achieved simple and easy victories again and again. Their self-confidence was greatly inflated, and they gradually changed from rejecting war to loving war, because war could not only bring them rich rewards, but also satisfy their recognition of their self-worth. One must know that being a sailor was not a good profession even on the technologically advanced Earth. Although the salary was much higher than ordinary professions, it was accompanied by all kinds of dangers and a boring life at sea. It was not something that ordinary people could bear. Moreover, the salary of a sailor in Oriar was not high. It was even comparable to a skilled carpenter or blacksmith. It was because of this that even when the Eye of Arcane was ambushed by the enemy and suffered heavy losses not long ago, it did not diminish their enthusiasm for war. Instead, it made them even more eager for the opportunity to perform. After all, it was easy to go from frugality to extravagance, but difficult to go from extravagance to frugality. After getting used to the respectful gazes of the bottom-level crew and the high salary, no one was willing to return to the half-dead state of the past. Therefore, the first organized flintlock team on the road marched toward the battlefield with high morale. The narrower the place where they could not dodge, the better the battlefield was for them to perform. Knight Wilson, who was in charge of the front line commanding the attack, quickly noticed the arrival of the backup. However, he was not sure what these fellows with slender metal sticks could do. Were they going to hit people with sticks? Bartholomew, who wanted to take revenge on the pirates, was not polite at all. As soon as he passed through the city gate, he shouted at the other party, "Withdraw! Withdraw all of you men from here. We'll be in charge of the attack next." "What? Are you sure you're not crazy?" Knight Wilson replied in surprise as he dodged a cold arrow shot from above. "Cut the crap. You still owe me 500 gold coins. Just send 30 shield-wielding swordsmen to protect our flanks." Bartholomew rudely interrupted the knight's doubts and roared at the crew behind him. "What are you waiting for? Line up. Reload. If anyone dares to drag us down, I'll take away his right to distribute the spoils. Line up. Reload. Line up. Reload." As soon as the order was given, the leader of the squad immediately repeated the order to his subordinates. In just half a minute, more than 100 people had completed their initial loading. Furthermore, they lined up in a line of 3 and neatly entered the path that led to the second layer of the wall. They had a clear division of labor. The frontmost rows were responsible for aiming straight ahead, while the rear rows were responsible for guarding the high ground. Once an enemy appeared, at least 5 guns would open fire at the same time. Just as Knight Wilson was considering whether to withdraw the Allied forces and reorganize, more than 30 pirates suddenly opened a secret door. They raised their long spears and attacked the gun-wielding crew members. Perhaps in their eyes, the spears in their hands were much longer than the metal sticks of the enemy, and they could completely take advantage of the terrain to kill this strange team in front of them. Unfortunately, they didn't know how big of a mistake they had made, because these metal rods weren't meant for close combat. Bartholomew raised his right hand and waved it with a sinister smile. Fire! Bang! Bang, bang, bang. After a series of explosions caused by the burning of gunpowder, the few unlucky pirates at the front had completely turned into sieves and fell into a pool of blood. They didn't even know how they died. They only felt an intense pain, and then their vision turned black. They had completely lost their lives. The sudden turn of events stunned the remaining pirates. They stared ahead in horror, as if they wanted to know what spell the enemy had used. However, Bartholomew obviously didn't intend to give them too much time to think. He continued to wave his hand, indicating for the first row to retreat and the second row to advance. Under his command, the mere 30 pirates were all wiped out in the blink of an eye. The dark red blood on the ground and the expressions of the corpses that died with their eyes wide open constantly reminded everyone who saw this scene of how terrifying those strangely shaped metal rods were. As an experienced commander, Knight Wilson instantly realized the special use of the flintlock in a battle. After all the passageways in the castle were very narrow, and there was no room for maneuvering or dodging. Unless the enemy was wearing heavy armor or holding a tower shield, ordinary armor would not be able to play the role it should be. Overjoyed, he immediately ordered the trumpeter beside him, "Have our men retreat immediately and protect the flanks of the crew. I like to see how long the pirates can resist." "As you wish, Your Excellency." The trumpeter bowed slightly, raised the horn, took a deep breath, and blew it. Woo, woo, woo. As the desolate sound of the horn spread to every corner, all the soldiers and knights who were fighting fiercely were shocked. They quickly abandoned their opponents and retreated. Before the pirates could figure out what was going on, Bartholomew led the musketeers to the gate of the second layer of the wall. Without saying a word, he aimed at the enemies gathered there and fired. More than 50 pirates died on the spot, and the remaining dozen or so were injured. They were scared out of their wits, and they let out heart-wrenching screams while shouting for surrender. However, the old captain obviously had no intention of keeping the captives. He waved his hand and signaled for his men to finish the job. This wasn't because he was cruel, but because the people who were hit by lead bullets couldn't be treated with conventional methods. Especially since the surgical techniques in this world were basically zero, it was better to give them a shot instead of letting the wounded suffer. After doing all this, Bartholomew ignored the terrified eyes of the pirates above. He ordered the crew to lift a barrel of gunpowder and place it on the gate. After that, he retreated to a safe distance and personally raised his flintlock to blow up the barrel. Everyone could only see a pillar of fire soaring into the sky. Boom! Accompanied by a deafening explosion, the gate and the surrounding walls within 5 meters were completely blown up into the sky. Even the nobles a kilometer away could feel the intense tremor of the earth. As for the pirates standing on the wall, not even their corpses could be found. One barrel of gunpowder was at least 50 kilograms, and the explosive power was far beyond the imagination of ordinary people. After all, the explosive packs from World War II only weighed about 10 kilograms, but they could kill enemies within 10 meters. Chapter 842. These pirates are done for. André pronounced the enemy's death sentence on the spot through the eyesight of his blindfold. He didn't even have the interest to continue watching. There are only about 500 pirates left in the castle to begin with. Now about 100 had been killed by the muskets, and another 40 had been killed by the explosion of gunpowder. In addition to the casualties from the tug-of-war with the Allied forces, the battle losses had reached more than half. Perhaps they would have had the courage to continue resisting before the addition of firearms, but with the explosion of the gunpowder barrel, their remaining confidence had been completely wiped out. Even if there were a few warriors with high professional levels who resisted with all their might, it was only a matter of time before they fell. Old George held up the monocular handed to him by his attendant and saw everything. Soon he sighed and said, "You're right. These pirates are finished. The next step is to clean up every corner and make sure no one escapes." The power of the muskets is indeed very good, especially when used in a narrow area. The effect is much stronger than bows and crossbows. As the head of the Mantell family, I formally place an order for 1 ton of gunpowder, 20 cannons, 200 spears, and 50 handguns. As for the materials, I'll think of a way to gather them. I guarantee they'll be delivered to you in a month at most. 1 ton of gunpowder is 30,000 gold coins. 20 cannons is 60,000 gold coins. 200 spears is 40,000 gold coins. And 50 handguns is 13,000 gold coins. Altogether, it's a total of 140,000 gold coins. As an old friend, I'll help you round off this small change. It's a total of 140,000 gold coins. In addition, I like to ask, how many bullets do you need? Especially the types of cannonballs you need? Solid bullets? Grape shot? Chain bullets? Andre was like a true weapons merchant at this moment. He carefully inquired about the customer's requirements so that he could provide the most perfect service. His goal wasn't as simple as making money, but to make the other party completely dependent on firearms. Thus, he didn't mind wasting his breath to explain the uses of each cannonball. Oh, can you explain the uses of all the cannonballs in detail? As expected, old George showed great interest. In fact, it wasn't just him. The other nobles also revealed curious gazes, wanting to know why there were so many types of cannonballs. Of course, please come with me. Andre made an inviting gesture and walked to the side of the carriage that was loaded with ammunition. He pried open one of the wooden boxes and introduced, "Look, this is the so-called chain bullet. It is made up of 2 solid iron balls and a chain. After it is fired, it can use its extremely fast rotation speed to break the mast of the target ship and make the enemy lose speed. In a naval battle, once it hits, it can directly decide the outcome." Then, he pried open another box. "Look, these are grape bullets. They are made up of dozens of smaller bullets. They look like a bunch of grapes, hence the name. Its main purpose was to maximize the damage to the enemy's strength. If the enemy gathered sailors and soldiers on the deck and prepared to dock, then don't hesitate to fill your cannon with grape shot. It was guaranteed that you would be able to kill at least a dozen enemies with 1 shot. Similarly, in defense or offense, if the opponent chooses a dense formation, it can also cause huge casualties. After introducing the grape shot, Andre kicked the boxes piled up in the open space with his foot. As for the last one, it is the solid bullet that you saw just now. It is mainly used for attacking. It can break the enemy's strong castle, destroy the main structure of the ship, and even break the formation. It is all competent. The cannon is not only used for one purpose, as you think. It is more accurate than any catapult and ballista. It can adapt to all kinds of wars and can even accurately destroy the enemy's catapult in defense. Of course, according to different uses, the cannon is not only the naval cannon that you see now. According to the range, destructive power, and terrain requirements, it can be big or small, long or short. In the future, I will continue to introduce new models to meet all of your needs. Clap, 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 clap. Wonderful, really wonderful. Yes, this is a day worth celebrating. I can guarantee that this weapon will give us enough advantage in naval battles. Long live the Alliance. As soon as he finished speaking, old George immediately took the lead in applauding. The nobles also echoed and were not stingy with their praises. At this moment, they felt that the price they paid was definitely worth it, especially a slightly plump middle-aged man. The fat on his face was trembling, and he almost rushed forward to give them 2 kisses. Andre was a little scared by the man's green eyes. He hurriedly lowered his voice and asked old George, "Dear friend, who is that overly enthusiastic guy? Why is he staring at me?" Old George smiled reservedly and explained in his ear, Don't be nervous. He doesn't mean any harm. He is just too happy to realize that he is about to make a fortune. You don't know yet, do you? His name is Igor Warrington, Viscount Warrington of Warrington City. Although his family has a long history, they have never been very powerful. However, they have 2 huge copper mines, a saltpeter mine, and a sulfur mine. Usually, the demand for these minerals is very low, so the profits are very meager. He has always wanted to sell them to others, but he has not been able to find the next buyer. Now, with the emergence of cannons and guns, the demand for copper, sulfur, and saltpeter has suddenly increased by dozens or hundreds of times. Is it strange that he is so enthusiastic about you? I dare to bet that it won't be long before he personally comes to talk to you and give you a valuable gift. So he's the owner of the mines. Andre nodded in realization. He finally knew why he could gather 150 tons of copper so quickly when he asked for it. It turned out that this slightly plump guy was the source. Just as he was a little lost in thought, the noble's president stepped forward and issued a series of orders, ranging from 30 to 50,000 gold coins to more than 100,000 gold coins. It was estimated that even if the materials were ready, it would take several months to complete the processing. In addition, some nobles expressed their interest in the new type of ship, the Eye of Arcane, and did not know when they could start ordering. Andre answered them one by one with a smile on his face, and in the end, he gave each of them a short gun as a gift. His gentle and refined attitude, as well as his various promises, made everyone forget the previous threats and unhappiness. The atmosphere became lively all of a sudden. If it were not for the fact that the cleaning work in the castle had not yet been completed, someone would have immediately proposed to hold a banquet to celebrate the birth of the alliance. As the saying goes, there is no love in the world for no reason, and there is no hatred for no reason. Everything is because of benefits. Chapter 843. As Bartholomew and the Flintlock team under his command displayed their prowess, the battle came to an end in just half an hour. Other than a handful of die-hard loyalists who retreated to the basement to continue the resistance, the rest were either killed by the volley of guns or by the knight's powerful individual martial arts. Knight Wilson ordered his men to lock up the captives and began to move the bodies and clean up the bloodstains, preparing to welcome the nobles into the fortress. As for the enemies who retreated to the basement, he was not in a hurry to deal with them. He planned to leave them for the nobles to liven up the atmosphere at the banquet later. After all, there was nothing more exciting and enjoyable than toying with the hearts of a group of enemies who were in a dilemma and had fallen into a hopeless situation. In a real feudal system, there was nothing more important than showing class privileges. Even on the battlefield, the nobles had to try their best to maintain their manners and poise. Unless there were special circumstances, such as when the noble was a powerful warrior or knight, he would not easily enter a place filled with corpses. While the nobles were intensely discussing the direction and system of the alliance's development, Andre came in front of the president, who was fiddling with a short gun. He smiled and greeted, "Master, are you interested in this little toy too? Don't worry, it can't hurt a mage. I've done tests. A level 2 defensive magic arrow is enough to block all the bullets." Little toy? Boris raised his eyebrows and stared with his sharp eyes, trying to see something from his face. But soon he shook his head lightly. "No, this is not a little toy. Although the power is still a little lacking, it represents a revolution, a huge revolution. It allows ordinary people to obtain destructive power similar to spellcasters. The entire Southern Sea will undergo a series of changes due to the appearance of these weapons, including trade, politics, military, and so on. I have to remind you, it's best to be careful. Your actions may attract the attention of the churches of the gods. They don't want another powerful kingdom or empire to appear in the southern region, and they don't want this country to be ruled by a group of spellcasters." In response to the president's warning, Andre only responded with a faint smile. He then lowered his voice and explained, "I've already prepared for this. Otherwise, why do you think I'm trying to rope in the nobles? The reason is simple. Since the birth of royalty and theocracy, it has been decided that they will always be at odds. No matter how the gods mediate, there is no way to change their nature. I only need to hide behind the scenes and push these nobles to the front. They will naturally make the church anxious. After all, it's not like a few hundred years ago when the gods could send down their incarnations or projections at will. They need to take into account the attitude and power of the secular rulers." It had to be said that Andre's plan was very sinister. First, he threw out a bait that the nobles could not refuse, using their financial, material, and manpower to build his own base. Then, he would integrate their resources and continuously earn a large amount of profits to invest in magic research and the cultivation of mages, slowly accumulating power until the day he could openly display it. Boris narrowed his eyes thoughtfully and said to himself, "It's a good plan, but how can you guarantee that these nobles won't join forces to usurp power one day? They are all experts at playing with power. I believe you have also felt it. The reason why they let you take the leading position in the alliance is because you have the knowledge and technology that they desire. Once the secrets of these weapons are revealed, I can guarantee that they will immediately join forces to oust you and take control of the entire alliance. Haha, since I've given them the prerequisite to overthrow me, I naturally have a way to ensure that this condition will never be triggered. Please forgive me for not telling you at the moment, because the fewer people who know about it, the better." Saying this, Andre's eyes revealed a meaningful look. How could he not know that as a ruling class aristocrat, they were born with an endless thirst for power, so they had already set up a series of checks and balances. If necessary, he would even use the dark forces in his hands to initiate infiltration into the various families and play some tricks on the issue of inheritance. All right, it seems like you've made sufficient preparations. Then I don't need to remind you anymore. Finally, as a mage, I wish your plan a success one day. Saying this, Boris solemnly placed one hand on his chest and performed a standard mage salute. As a mage, he was very happy to see the rise of another mage country, and even more so to see the glory of the ancient magic civilization. Thus, he paid his respects to anyone who was willing to invest time and effort in this. Andre returned the salute. "Thank you for your blessings. I guarantee that you will personally witness the arrival of this day." "Ha ha! Then I'll look forward to seeing what kind of miracle you can create with these eyes of mine." Boris ended the topic with a hearty laugh. Ever since he saw Cecil imprisoned in the Mage Tower's dungeon, he had completely lost interest in his identity as the president of the Mage Association. His mind was filled with thoughts of how he would slowly fade away from everyone's sight after obtaining an endless lifespan. He would then find a secluded place and slowly delve into the mysteries of magic. Thus, he had no interest in knowing the madness and ambition hidden under Andre's calm exterior. Miracles are only open to those who are prepared. I will lay low and accumulate strength before it arrives. At the same time, the Linton City Mage Association will continue to operate as usual. Andre knew what the great mage in front of him wanted to hear the most, so he gave his promise without hesitation. Boris nodded in satisfaction. "Very good. I believe in your promise. Now tell me, what do you plan to do with this mage tower below us? More specifically, what do you plan to do with the books and knowledge stored inside? You must know that they were originally a part of the Mage Association. I hope to see them return before I step down." Andre stroked the stubble that had just grown on his chin. After a few seconds of consideration, he immediately replied, "Please rest assured, I will store them in the library in front of all the members during the handover of power." You are truly a cunning little fox. The timing you chose is simply perfect. Not only can you divert the attention of the members from the handover of power to the new knowledge, you can also intimidate those who are dissatisfied with you. It seems that I don't need to worry about anything anymore. You will definitely be able to handle everything. President Boris's mood was obviously quite good. He even changed from his usual serious appearance and started joking. Chapter 844. An hour later, the banquet was held in the hall of the pirate castle as scheduled. Apart from the nobles celebrating their victory, there were also smugglers like Willie Galt and Tim. Although their appearance made old George rather resentful, he was finally convinced by Andre that he needed more channels and routes, and reluctantly accepted them into the alliance. It was important to know that those who could expand and become strong in the smuggling industry often controlled many secret routes that ordinary merchants would never know about, as well as a huge underground sales channel network. Even if the nobles did not like them, they would temporarily put aside their discrimination for the sake of benefits. Once they understood the other party's routes and sales channels, they would then think of ways to push the smugglers out and enjoy more resources and profits alone. Of course, the smugglers were also very clear about the nobles' attitude towards them, so they did not hesitate to choose to stick together, intending to follow closely behind Andre and borrow his strength to protect their own interests from being infringed upon. A banquet full of intrigue and deceit slowly unfolded in an atmosphere filled with laughter on the surface and the shadows of swords in the dark. Everyone had a polite smile on their faces as they greeted each other and gave their blessings. No matter how much they hated each other in their hearts, they would not show it. Andre narrowed his eyes, taking in everything in. The corners of his mouth curled up slightly, his eyes full of ridicule and amusement. There was no doubt that these smugglers were deliberately pushed out by him as a trump card to balance the power in the hands of the nobles. As long as the two sides continued to be in opposition, he would never have to worry about losing the leadership of the alliance. At the same time, he would be able to maintain a state of healthy competition and mutual supervision, ensuring that the long-term monopoly would not lead to corruption. It was killing two birds with one stone. Just as he was considering whether he still needed to take both sides of the system and completely cut off the possibility of mergers in the future, he suddenly felt a black shadow moving behind him. Andre, who had always been very sensitive to danger, immediately turned his head, his fingertips releasing a faint fluorescent light. Anyone who was sensitive to magic could understand the terrifying power contained within. The black shadow obviously did not intend to test the power of this spell. It hurriedly came out of the darkness, raised its hands, and explained in a low voice, "Don't be nervous, respected Sir Wizard. I have no ill intentions. I just want to inform you of something." "Oh, is that so?" Andre glanced at his surroundings. After confirming that the nobles hadn't noticed anything, he took 2 steps forward and stared at the Ratman thief hiding in the darkness. "Tell me your name. Who are you loyal to? And what are you here to tell me? Don't try to lie, and don't try to hide any secrets. Otherwise, I guarantee that you will pay the price in blood. Of course, esteemed Sir Mage, you've already proven your ability with your actions. Hundreds of our compatriots have died under your deadly magic, and they didn't even have time to react. Therefore, I respect you and am willing to submit to you. My only request is that you promise to avenge the old leader." With that, the rat orc lowered his head and bent his knees slightly to show his humility. From those pitch-black eyes, Andre could not see any resentment. It was as if the death of all the rat men who had entered the upper city district was nothing to him. Without a doubt, this kind of attitude was truly inconceivable. After all, under the iron fist rule of Old Bernie, the rat men had always maintained the unity of their tribe through family, relatives, and friends. No matter how big the conflict was, they would still be united when facing outsiders. Normally, if any rat man knew that someone had slaughtered hundreds of his compatriots, his first reaction would definitely be to rush forward and fight with his life and not show such a submissive attitude. The rat man thief seemed to have noticed Andre's suspicion. He gently shook the slender tail behind his buttocks and explained in a sorrowful tone, "Perhaps you find it very strange. Why am I not sad about the death of nearly half of my compatriots? The reason is simple. I already knew a long time ago that once the old leader died, the entire tribe would fall apart. Facts have proven that this prediction was not wrong at all. The leader had only died for less than a day, and those short-sighted fellows had already betrayed his ideals. Especially Pierre, who used the power of anger and hatred to incite riots in an attempt to seize the leadership position of the tribe. He never used his brain to think about the consequences of doing so. But I am different. I used to be the leader's shadow, collecting and organizing all kinds of information for him. I know that there are many forces in this world that are more powerful than us, so I don't care how many of my compatriots you have killed. I only care about whether you can give the rat men a bright future according to the original agreement." "You are King Capet?" Andre suddenly recalled the information sent by Mia not long ago and called out the other party's name. He could feel that this rat man in front of him was different from any other rat man he had seen before. There was no extreme emotion, such as hatred or anger in the other party's eyes. Instead, They were full of wisdom, as if a scholar had suddenly appeared in a group of terrorists. It was really impressive. The Ratman thief did not try to deny it, and nodded generously. Yes, I am Ken Copped, a true expert in collecting information. I know every corner of this city's complex underground maze. If you want me and my men to be loyal to you, then agree to the conditions just now. In order to show my sincerity, I will now tell you an important piece of news for free. A group of people of unknown origin occupied the North Sewer a few days ago, and they seem to be secretly preparing something there. Finally, I am very sorry for taking the liberty to attend this banquet without receiving an invitation. If you have made a decision, just let that little kitty pass on a message. She knows where to find me. As the last word fell, he quickly disappeared into the darkness and quietly left the hall. He did not make the slightest sound, as if everything just now was an illusion. With the dark vision in his bloodline, Andre could easily see how the other party stretched his body, passed through the iron fence that was only 4 fingers wide, and left along the drainage channel that led to the outside world. What an interesting person, he muttered to himself. He quickly took out the map he had gotten from Tim as he muttered to himself. He carefully looked at the north side of the sewer, and the corner of his mouth quickly drew an arc. Dear Gillis Channy and Casimir Kiz, I think I have caught your little tale. Chapter 845. When he was living in Lonely Mountain Town, Andre had once heard an old hunter say that the most dangerous animals in the forest weren't the tigers, leopards, bears, wolves, or other carnivores, but the venomous snakes that hid in the shadows. If the former were dealt with properly, they could completely avoid direct conflict, but if the latter were to be accidentally touched, there was no chance of survival. He hadn't thought much of this theory at first, but as he hunted more and more, he gradually realized that the old hunter's words were true. Compared to the ferocious beasts that liked to hunt openly with their teeth and claws, the truly terrifying enemies were the snakes that hid in the bushes, branches, and piles of rocks, and would suddenly rush out to bite you and inject you with a fatal poison. Because no one knew where the venomous snakes were hiding and when they would attack, they couldn't take precautions. Other than being careful and vigilant, there wasn't much that could be done. Similarly, the enemies in the open weren't scary, but the ones in hiding. They were like the venomous snakes in the forest, ready to jump out at any time to launch a fatal attack. It was obvious that to Andre, the vampire Gildred and the devil's agent Casimir Kiz were the venomous snakes hidden in the shadows. Now that he'd found their hiding place, he naturally had to make some corresponding arrangements. Otherwise, how could he be worthy of the chaos these fellows had created? After all, Old Bernie's death had a huge impact on his plan to seize the entire Sardinia Islands. If not for his allies arriving in time, the entire city would probably still be in chaos. Who knew how many innocent citizens would have been implicated and how many buildings would have burned to ashes in the sea of flames? The ratmen that had lost their rationality would release all the pent-up anger in their hearts and ignite all of Valen City. Just look at the manors and villas and ruins in the upper city, and you'd know what the consequences of losing order were. Just as Andre lowered his head and pondered how to teach the other party a lesson that would leave a deep impression, he suddenly smelled a familiar fragrance. 2 slender arms wrapped around his neck from behind and gently blew into his ear. Hey, darling, what are you thinking about here? Without a doubt, apart from Chloe, there wasn't a second person who could make such an intimate gesture. Andre didn't even turn his head as he replied with a smile. Nothing. I was just thinking about how to take revenge on those 2 annoying fellows and let them taste pain and despair. Oh, someone actually dared to find trouble with you? Can you tell me who they are? Chloe moved closer and asked with her big eyes full of curiosity. Perhaps it was because she had drunk some wine, but her face was slightly flushed. Her skin, tanned by the sun, was full of health and beauty, making people want to kiss and caress her. One is a vampire, and the other can be considered half a devil. They have been hiding in the dark and causing me a lot of trouble. Now that I know where they are hiding, you should know. Andre revealed a mischievous smile as he spoke. He looked like a child who was about to play a prank. This expression undoubtedly aroused the rebellious nature hidden under Chloe's cute appearance. She raised the glass in her hand and drank all the wine in it in one gulp. She exclaimed excitedly, "Aha! Vampires and demons." This was the real adventure in the bard's story. It seems that during the time you were missing, you must have experienced a lot of interesting things. Quickly share with me. Andre helplessly shrugged his shoulders and selectively talked about some of his experiences after he was rescued. Especially when he talked about the thrilling part, the girl covered her mouth and exclaimed, her eyes full of envy. Perhaps for the girl, this kind of dangerous and unexpected situation was the life she truly yearned for. It was just like how many women had a dream of having a Prince Charming. Regardless of age, status, or appearance, even at the moment of death, this dream would not be shattered. Unknowingly, some guests began to gather around the two, listening to Andre's story with great interest. Even the arrogant nobles were no exception, especially President Boris, who was very eager to know what this young man in front of him had experienced to be able to increase his spellcasting level so quickly in such a short time. Oriar itself was a world where the speed of information transmission was very slow, which led to the knowledge of most people being limited to a certain range. Their knowledge of the outside world depended on the stories of the bard, as well as the chatter of the adventurers and merchants passing by. People living in the age of information explosion could never imagine how boring this kind of life was. Therefore, any novel knowledge and story would often attract a lot of listeners. Otherwise, there would not be so many wandering bards. Their duty was to collect information and various interesting things in one place, and then bring them to the next place, connecting the whole world. Although most of the information was outdated by a few months or even a few years, it was still much better than having nothing in front of their eyes. Chloe opened her mouth slightly and asked in astonishment, "So, because you used the power given by the Prince of Fire Elements, Aesop Desir, you temporarily lost your spellcasting ability. So you had to learn swordsmanship according to the knowledge in books, and even became a good wandering swordsman." Although she had heard a lot of exaggerated stories, she had never heard of a hero in a story who could jump from one profession to another in such a short time. Of course, she was not the only one who had the same expression. The nobles and merchants gathered around had the same expression. Andre smiled slightly and quickly pulled out the thin sword hanging on his waist. He casually drew a beautiful sword flower and teased, "What? You don't believe it? It doesn't matter. Anything can be faked except for swordsmanship. You could try it yourself." Chloe did not say anything and immediately pulled out her sword. She made a sword salute and provoked, "Let's try it. I don't believe that you can learn swordsmanship so quickly." Seeing that the two of them were about to spar, everyone immediately distanced themselves from them, giving them a lot of space. There were even a few guys who wanted to see the world in chaos, who took the opportunity to start gambling. There were also some guys who were cheering on from the side. After all, it was rare to see a mage who chose to be a part-time mage, let alone a wandering swordsman. Only President Boris frowned, as if he had noticed something. Chapter 846. Swordsmanship was no stranger to most of the people at the banquet, especially the nobles. Regardless of whether they were talented in swordsmanship or not, they had to receive strict training from a young age to ensure that they would at least have the ability to fight back in times of danger. Similarly, the smugglers and knights were also skilled in swordsmanship. The former would often encounter all kinds of dangers and challenges when accumulating capital, such as robbery and betrayal. Their swordsmanship was even better than most of the nobles who lived like princes. The latter were born to fight. Generally speaking, they had to leave their parents at the age of 5 to 7 to serve as attendants in the monarch's house. Not only did they have to spend a lot of time practicing their swordsmanship, but they also had to be responsible for feeding horses, doing chores, and learning all kinds of etiquette until they graduated at the age of 18 to 24-25. To a certain extent, sword sparring was a very common thing in this world. It could even be understood as a dangerous sport that was similar to hunting. Therefore, it was not considered rude to have a sword sparring match at a banquet. In fact, it was a good way to liven things up. Of course, the two people who were about to duel, one was a young and handsome male mage, and the other was a beautiful noble lady. Their appearance alone was enough to attract countless eyes. Even Lady Anastasia was watching with a smile on her face. She did not have the slightest intention of stopping them. It was unknown if it was due to the increasing number of spectators or the stimulation from the alcohol, but Crowley seemed to be a little excited. Raising the rapier in his hand, he tenderly asked, "Darling, don't tell me you intend to stand there until dawn? If you don't attack, I won't be polite anymore." "Ha ha ha. My friend, it's not a good habit to keep a beautiful lady waiting for a long time, especially when this lady is your fiancée." Old George laughed and teased him, his eyes full of playful light. As the leader of the conservative nobles, he had long known about the marriage between the two. Now, this young couple was actually going to duel in public. Was there anything more fun in the world than this? What's more, he really wanted to know if the young man in front of him had really become a wandering swordsman with good swordsmanship, as described in the story just now. If so, they would be too shocking and worth remembering. Even though it was common for Oriar to take on jobs, most of them were similar to their own class. For example, warriors would take on the job of ranger in order to have better survivability in the wild. Thieves would take on the job of warrior in order to have stronger frontal combat abilities. Apart from that, there were also priests who took on the role of a warrior in order to better serve the church. Druids took on the role of a priest because they believed in a certain nature god. In short, there was a reason why most professions chose to take on the role of a priest, and it just so happened that mages were the least suitable profession for them. After all, profound magic alone was enough to take a person a lifetime to research. Who would have the time to hone their fighting skills and swordsmanship? In addition, there were already some spells among the arcane arts that could improve one's melee combat ability. Mages didn't need to waste their time on these two aspects. Sorcerers and paladins were also not suitable for the job. Sorcerers and paladins would not be able to unleash the power of their bloodline if they wasted their energy on other things. Paladins would lose a lot of their special abilities if they chose to take the job, because it meant that they might deviate from the noble ideals of the righteous faction. Feeling the countless suspicious and prying eyes, Andre smiled slightly. He calmly stroked the cold blade of his sword with his finger and said to the eager girl, "My dear, don't be shy with me. As long as you're ready, you can attack me at any time. Don't worry, I'll know my limits. I won't hurt a single hair on your body. Hee hee, don't be in such a hurry to brag. Otherwise, you'll lose too badly and lose face." After saying that, Chloe licked her lips, and the muscles all over her body quickly tightened. She looked like a little leopard that was about to hunt. Because her master was a thief, and her weapon of choice was a rapier, she walked the path of lightness and swiftness. Once she moved, it would be hard for her opponent to block. Stabbing was the simplest and fastest movement of all the sword moves. If one's reaction was even a little bit slower, their vital parts would be pierced. Just looking at Chloe's starting stance, the few knights around her who were skilled in martial arts nodded in approval. This was because this was not a showy stance that was usually used for performances. This was a real killing sword move. Although this kind of swordsmanship was not very effective when dealing with huge beasts or monsters, it could often kill humans, elves, dwarves, and other intelligent races within a few seconds. Andre's performance was the complete opposite. He did not take any defensive posture, nor did he tighten his muscles. He just let his hand that was holding the sword naturally hang down. It did not look like he knew any swordsmanship at all. "Be careful." Chloe, who had always been impatient, stood on her tiptoes and rushed forward at lightning speed. Her steps were unusually agile and steady. It was obvious that she had put in a lot of effort. Old George's eyes lit up slightly as he muttered to himself, "It's really pleasing to the eye. I remember that Chloe didn't like to exercise before. What did she have such outstanding skills?" My dear Earl, you have to understand that for a woman, nothing is more important than love. Once they find a man in their life who is willing to give everything for them, they will quickly make a huge sacrifice and change. Lady Anastasia's lips curled up slightly as she gave a meaningful answer. It could be seen that there was an unconcealable pride between her eyebrows. After all, this marriage not only brought a huge amount of wealth to the Mariel family, but also helped the family get rid of a big trouble. Moreover, it also allowed his beloved niece to obtain love and happiness. Was there anything more wonderful than this in the world? Oh, so everything is the result of love? Old George was slightly surprised as he glanced at the mature woman beside him who was well known for her beauty. He originally thought that Anastasia was just an ordinary noblewoman who relied on her beauty to seduce the Duke to get to the top. But now, it seemed that everyone was ridiculously wrong. She was clearly an expert in politics. After being in Lincoln City for so many years, she did not have a single enemy. In particular, in terms of judgment, she was more than 10 times better than most of the people present. The Countess clearly enjoyed such a gaze. She smiled reservedly and replied, "Earl, although it makes me happy to see you looking at me like this, I still suggest that you focus on the battlefield because the real answer is about to be revealed, isn't it?" Chapter 847. Of course, madam. I can't wait to know the result. But before that, I hope to take some time to have a private chat with you. After all, it won't be long before you take over my current position. You should know that serving the entire alliance isn't an easy job, especially when it comes to alleviating conflicts and friction between each other. I'm afraid your methods won't come in handy for the time being. When old George said this, he lowered his head slightly and leaned close to the other person's ear. At the same time, he maintained a polite smile and tried to keep his voice as low as possible. On the surface, it looked like he was making an unimportant joke. But Lady Anastasia's expression changed 3 times, and she quickly responded, "No problem. It's my honor to receive an invitation from an old gentleman like you." There was no doubt that she was aware of the hidden threat in old George's words. If she didn't accept this invitation, then she would never be able to truly obtain the support of the conservative nobles. Thus, after a little consideration, she immediately gave an affirmative answer. The exchange of power was never a simple matter, especially when it involved more than a dozen powerful conservative nobles. They needed to know if Lady Anastasia had the determination and ability to protect their interests. Old George was obviously very satisfied with the Countess' cooperative attitude. He nodded lightly and didn't speak again. Instead, he turned his gaze to the young, unmarried couple who were competing in swordsmanship. While they were talking, Chloe had already rushed less than 5 meters away, waving her rapier and launching a series of fierce attacks. Due to the speed of her stabs, the cold light reflected from the tip of the rapier was like a star, looking exceptionally beautiful and dazzling. Many of the surrounding guests applauded and cheered. For a young noble lady to have such outstanding swordsmanship, it was already considered pretty good. Even a knight expressed that if he didn't have a shield or armor, he would have been injured by such a high-speed attack. However, what surprised everyone even more was that André was unhurriedly brandishing his rapier as he slowly retreated. He actually managed to deflect every single stab, and the position of the collision was exactly the same as if he was deliberately putting on a show. Only those who were truly proficient in swordsmanship and understood swordsmanship knew how frightening the calculation ability, as well as the coordination between hands and eyes, were. They couldn't hide their shock. They could not believe that a mage could use such exquisite swordsmanship, coupled with the strange and never-before-seen footwork. Even if he had the guidance of a master, he would need at least 3 to 5 years of hard work and practice. It was very clear that a 15-year-old mage and potion master was not a genius, but a true monster. However, these people would never understand that André's ability did not come from training or learning. Instead, it came from the Arcane Eye, the ultimate artifact of the ancient magic civilization. It was a terrifying power that even the gods feared. After 2 minutes of continuous attacks, Chloe's stamina was rapidly depleting. Soon, she was out of breath. As she panted heavily, her eyes widened as she asked, Damn, damn it. Your, your swordsmanship. When did it become so powerful? Huh, who knows? Maybe I'm a once-in-a-century genius. Andre shrugged his shoulders with a smile. It was obvious that he was joking. After all, no matter how much of a genius one was, it was impossible to learn swordsmanship from books alone. Otherwise, what would be the use of instructors? One had to know that the most vocational training institutions in Orire were not towers for mages, nor were they basements for thieves, nor were they shrines for priests. Instead, they were training camps for warriors and knights. Every year, countless youths who loved fighting or adventuring would go there to learn from the experienced old warriors. Some were even willing to pay a fee for it. Name. Tell me the name of your swordsmanship school. Liz said that the swordsmanship she taught me is called the Talhav Swordsmanship. It's one of the top swordsmanship schools in the South, but you easily blocked all my attacks. This means that you're using a more advanced school of swordsmanship. Although Chloe was usually naive and a little silly, she was not at all careless at critical moments. She immediately pointed out the crux of the problem. She could feel that her lover had not even used a fifth of his strength, especially the speed of his arms. In a short moment, there were faint afterimages. The spectators all pricked up their ears, wanting to know what school of swordsmanship this young mage had learned. A few of the younger knights were even itching to challenge him personally. Andre swept his gaze across everyone present with a playful look. The corners of his lips curled up at an unnoticeable angle as he softly spat out a few words. Johannes sect, twilight, swordsmanship. Although it was only a few words, it instantly ignited the emotions of the spectators. Oh God, is there something wrong with my ears? Johannes school, twilight, swordsmanship. How is this possible? Wasn't the twilight swordsmanship lost hundreds of years ago? Oh God, the greatest swordsmanship in human history has fallen into the hands of mage. Fate is playing a big joke on us. For a moment, everyone was expressing their opinions. They looked very excited, as if they saw a buried treasure being unearthed. But it was not surprising. After all, learning magic, divine arts, and other supernatural powers required talent and a lot of money. But swordsmanship was different. As long as one's physical fitness was good enough, they could improve through perseverance. Moreover, this swordsmanship was the long-lost Johannes school, twilight swordsmanship. Of course, all of this was deliberately arranged by Andre. He needed to spread the precious swordsmanship manuscript in his hands through a special method. This way, he could get rid of the Black Blade organization and avoid having to be on guard against sudden attacks all day long. After all, attacking an advanced mage who had mastered level 5 arcane spells was much easier than attacking a group of low-level warriors and knights. Although it was slightly more troublesome to collect the contents of the notes from the latter. Obviously, Knight Wilson did not know about Andre's sinister intentions. He stepped forward excitedly and solemnly performed a knight's salute. Your Excellency, please allow me to be your opponent. Even in my dreams, I would like to personally witness the greatness of the Johannes sect, the twilight swordsmanship. Chapter 848. Ha ha, Mr. Knight, are you sure you're not joking? Although my swordsmanship is passable, it's still not enough to compare with a knight. Andre laughed as he sheathed his sword and spread his hands innocently. Although the profession of wandering swordsman had the advantage in a one-on-one duel, he was not arrogant enough to think that he could defeat a level 5 warrior and level 3 knight as a level 3 rogue swordsman. One had to know that melee professions were different from spellcasters who had infinite possibilities. Every increase in their level meant an increase in their physical fitness, experience, and martial arts skills. Although there were examples of low-level warriors defeating high-level warriors, the probability was almost the same as being hit by a meteorite falling from the sky while walking on the street. The Johannes school, twilight swordsmanship, might be very powerful, but Andre did not even study it after he got it. He only had a rough understanding of it, so that he could have a clear idea of the warrior's martial arts. If such a half-baked level could defeat a seasoned knight, then all melee professions on the continent would have disappeared in the long river of history and would be completely replaced by spellcasters. Wilson was obviously not willing to give up. He stared at Sui Xiong with his fanatical eyes and advised, "Sir, please don't be too humble. We all saw your swordsmanship just now. Maybe you're not as good as a knight in terms of physical quality, but you're already ahead of us in terms of skills. Please don't worry. I swear in the name of the God of Guards that I will never use the special ability of a knight in the duel. It's just a duel of swordsmanship." The God of Guard was a god who worshipped absolute order. He did not care about good and evil, but he emphasized the importance of order. For example, the subordinates must obey the orders of their superiors. They could not run away during a battle. Even if they did not agree with the orders, they had to carry it out first. Many nobles promoted this set of doctrines among their soldiers and knights to ensure the loyalty of the army. Since he swore in the name of the god, it meant that Andre could not shirk anymore. Otherwise, it would be a contempt to the god and an insult to the entire knight class. In desperation, he could only pull out his sword again and sighed, "You're really persistent. All right, I can agree to the duel. But before we start, I have to make one thing clear. I have very little combat experience, so once I go all out, it means that I can't stop. If there's an accident, please don't regret it. Of course, this is a battle I requested, so naturally, I will take full responsibility for it." Wilson, who had long fallen into a state of madness, did not even see the look in his monarch, Count Mantel's eyes. He agreed without even thinking. As a knight who was obsessed with martial arts and swordsmanship, he would definitely spend the rest of his life in regret and pain if he missed out on the famous Johannes Sechs swordsmanship today. Then what are we waiting for? Please get ready, knight. I promise you that I will show you the essence of twilight swordsmanship. Andre raised the thin sword above his head, as if it was the horn of a bull. This was one of the 4 starting moves of the Johannes school's swordsmanship, the bull position starting stance. The essence of this move was to raise the sword slightly above the head and keep it parallel to the ground. The advantage of this move was that it could defend against the opponent's attacks from above and at the same time allow the sword wielder to quickly counterattack with a sudden thrust. As for the other 4 starting moves, they were the plow position starting stance, the top position starting stance, and the decoy position starting stance. They almost covered all the defensive and counterattacking skills needed in swordsmanship. Even the way to hold the sword was specially explained. Wilson instantly recognized the brilliance of this starting move. He immediately drew out his own sword and borrowed a shield from another knight. He shouted excitedly, "Come on, please attack as much as you want. I'm ready." Andre did not waste any time. He took a big stride and instantly broke into the opponent's defensive range. The thin sword was slightly slanted downwards and pierced towards the opponent's eyes. Under the candlelight, the sword reflected a dazzling golden light. Just like the name of the swordsmanship, it was like the evening sun. The sudden strong light made Wilson's eyes subconsciously avert his eyes. However, with his rich battle experience, he still judged the angle of the sword and immediately raised the shield to block his face. The next second, he only felt a violent impact from the arm holding the shield. His whole body involuntarily took a few steps back. When he regained his balance, he was shocked to find that the kite shield in his hand had been pierced through. Magic weapon? Wilson asked in disbelief. One must know that the shield in his hand was not a broken one that was wrapped and would like those ordinary soldiers. It was a real medium-sized shield that was embedded with steel plates. Aha, it's half and half. The sharpness of the sword is one aspect. The other aspect is the strength of the sunset swordsmanship itself. Perhaps you don't know that the sunset swordsmanship pursues extreme speed. This also means that it has a penetrating power that other swordsmanship cannot compare to. Therefore, a shield cannot completely block its power. Andre did not have the slightest intention to continue the attack. He smiled and explained the source of the power of the sword just now. Hearing this, everyone's eyes lit up, especially some knights who fixed their eyes on Zhang Tai's arms and wrists. They planned to see how Zhang Tai's muscles exerted force in the next attack. Awesome! It is indeed the swordsmanship created by the master swordsman, Johannes. I can almost feel his arrogant demeanor in the past. Sir, please don't hold back. Show me the essence of the sunset swordsmanship. I can't wait to see its true form. After saying that, Wilson got into his battle posture again. Even an idiot could see that his fighting spirit was completely aroused. His whole body was brimming with unconcealable excitement. As you wish. As these four words left his mouth, Andre was like an arrow that left the bow. In the blink of an eye, he came close to Wilson and launched a storm of attacks. Every time he attacked, he would use the principle of light refraction to interfere with his opponent's vision. He also tried his best to avoid the collision of weapons as much as possible. This was because with his current strength of 12 points, it was impossible for him to compete with a knight who had more than 18 points of strength. If he was not careful, the weapon in his hand would instantly fly out. At this moment, Wilson was like a small boat in a storm. He was waving his sword and shield in a very awkward manner, trying to block all the attacks. However, his agility and speed were far inferior to Andre's. In less than a minute, there were 7 to 8 wounds of various sizes on his body. Although none of them were deep, the pain they brought was not small at all. Chapter 849. Looking at the knight's battered appearance and Andre's incomparably brave posture, old George opened his mouth slightly and exclaimed in a low voice, "Oh my God, is he really a mage?" After so many years, this is the first time I've seen Wilson being suppressed in terms of swordsmanship. Count, you've only seen the surface. Although Sir Andre's attack was very fierce, it was built on the basis that Knight Wilson did not fight back with all his strength. In fact, with the knight's strong physique, he could have chosen to exchange injuries for life. However, this would not be a sparring, but a real battle of life and death. Obviously, Wilson did not want to do that. He longed to see the full extent of the Johannes sex swordsmanship, so he chose to take these injuries on his own accord. When his opponent was exhausted, he could easily win. A knight with a high level of swordsmanship hurriedly explained in order to protect the reputation of his own class. He did not want to leave an impression on all the nobles present that a knight was nothing more than that, just because of a mere sparring. So, Wilson is not in danger of being defeated or seriously injured. Old George asked with uncertainty. The knight nodded seriously. That's right. This duel was destined to be unfair from the beginning. Therefore, both parties were only limited to the sparring of swordsmanship. Otherwise, Wilson would have been able to send his opponent's weapon flying with a few blows if he had activated his brute force mode. Hearing that his subordinate was sure to win, old George immediately calmed down a lot. He began to let go of his nervousness and began to admire the smooth attacks of the sunset swordsmanship. As for the other guests, they desperately wanted to record every movement in their minds so that they could go back and find an artist to draw it, so that it could be passed down as a family heirloom for future generations. They did not know that Andre had made up his mind to share all the contents of the manuscript. They also did not know what kind of danger would come with learning this set of swordsmanship. As the saying goes, if you can't win after a long time, you'll definitely lose. Although Andre's physical strength was slightly better than Chloe's, he could not withstand such high intensity and intense exercise. After just a few minutes, his breathing began to become disordered. As his breathing became disordered, his steps naturally became disordered as well. A flaw appeared in the impenetrable attack. Good chance. Wilson accurately grasped this fleeting moment. He swung his long sword and heavily struck the rapier's body, causing Andre's right hand to go numb. The weapon slipped out of his hand and stabbed into the wooden floor. However, this was not the end. He used his back foot as the center of gravity and leaped forward with all his strength, trying to use his shield to hit the opponent's chest to completely seal the victory. Seeing Wilson's attack, Andre's unarmed. He knew that he would not be able to dodge. He immediately activated the short-distance teleportation spell and disappeared from where he was in the blink of an eye. Wilson, who had missed his target, quickly turned around. His two sharp eyes widened as he began to search for traces of his opponent. But before he could find it, Andre had already walked out from the crowd. He picked up the rapier on the ground and said with a smile, "Let's call it a day, Mr. Knight. I used magic just now, so you win this duel." After saying that, he waved at the elven druid hiding in the corner. "Nina, come and heal this knight." "Yes, master." The son of the blue wolf, who had covered his entire body with a cloak, stood out under the gaze of countless pairs of eyes. He began to chant a spell with a heavenly voice. Soon, a gust of green energy enveloped Wilson. In less than 5 seconds, all the bleeding wounds on his body were miraculously healed. Not even a scar was left. After doing all this, Nina bowed to her master. She ignored the astonished eyes of the others and returned to the corner of the hall. Together with her animal companion, the winter wolf, she ate a fresh fish steak. As a life created by magic, in her eyes, other than Andre, there was nothing worthy of her concern. She was fearless even in the face of death. Wilson lowered his head and glanced at his unscathed chest. He put away his sword and shield, put one hand on his chest, and bowed solemnly. "Thank you. Thank you very much for your kindness and generosity. I owe you a favor. If there's anything you need in the future, please don't hesitate to ask. As long as it's not against morality and the spirit of chivalry, I'll do my best to repay you." He was very clear that he had gained a lot of benefits in this competition, especially the few starting postures and force exertion techniques. Once they were combined with the existing martial arts techniques, his strength would be greatly improved in an instant. Staring at the sincere eyes of the knight, Andre suddenly laughed without warning. He laughed very happily. As he laughed, he asked why. "Are you satisfied with just this little gain?" "What do you mean by that?" Wilson raised his head and asked in confusion. "Literally, you should know that the techniques of the Johannes sect that I've gained are not only the Twilight Sword arts, but also other aspects." As he spoke, Andre took out the manuscript that had been deciphered by Jennifer. In an instant, countless burning gazes were fixed on the booklet that was held up by dozens of parchments. As everyone knew, Orire was a world where power reigned supreme. No one would not be tempted by the precious treasure left behind by the greatest warrior in human history. Looking at Wilson's reaction at the moment, he could tell that his whole body was trembling uncontrollably. He subconsciously wanted to reach out and snatch it, but he stopped halfway. Following that, he let out a helpless and bitter laugh. "I'm sorry, Your Excellency. I forgot myself. You shouldn't take it out, especially not in public. It will cause a storm of blood, and countless people will lose their lives trying to snatch it." "That's right. Put it away quickly." Lady Anastasia stood out and shouted with a flushed face. She could not believe that Andre would show such a precious thing in front of so many nobles. Even if he did not use it, he could totally leave it for his family. "Put away?" "No. As a mage, I think this is a treasure that belongs to the warriors and knights. It should not be locked in a dark treasury. It should be taken out and shared with everyone." "Everyone, since you are all my closest allies, then I'll donate this manuscript of the Sword Arts Master Johannes to the Alliance. In the future, every family that holds shares in the Alliance can read the contents recorded in it." In order to set the atmosphere, Andre quietly cast a friendly spell on himself when he was speaking. It could make the spellcaster more approachable, as if the spellcaster was the other party's closest family member and friend. Many rulers like to secretly cast a friendly spell on themselves when they were giving a speech. The effect was extraordinarily good. You're tuning into the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.